Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the work session, Las Cruces City Council. Today is Monday, February 24th, 2020. It's approximately 1 p.m. If you'd please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please. Jennifer Martinez from our communications office will introduce our pet of the week.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I am Jennifer Martinez with the city's communications office, and I'd like you to meet Maverick, the three-legged wonder. Maverick is the perfect mix of cute and cuddly, and he is in need of a forever home. Would anybody be interested in adopting him? You can meet Maverick at the Animal Service Center of the Mesilla Valley, located at 3551 Baton Memorial West. The hours of operation are Monday through Friday, noon to 6 p.m., and on Saturday and Sunday, noon to 5 p.m. And there is an off-site location this weekend that includes the farmers market from 9 a.m. to noon. Hopefully this is the last time I'll have to mention this until the winter returns, but we ask that you never leave your pets outside for long periods of time. If your pet has short hair, know their limits. If walking, use reflective gear, especially with daylight saving time and darkness. Wipe their paws, and then for cats, make sure you check vehicle hoods as they may climb into or onto cars for warmth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. Okay, we have one item for today's agenda. And depending on how long it goes, that's why it's just one item. So a while back, a few years back, and I see Mayor Pro Tem Emeritus Sharon Thomas in the audience, the city of Las Cruces was one of 4 cities to receive about a $2 million grant to help plan various, what they feel, different corridors. And so we were one of 4 cities selected, and we chose to use El Paseo. Now, the drawback or the kicker was there was no money involved. It was all planning from the HUD or Transportation, Department of Transportation, a few other federal agencies. And so we did some pretty extensive planning, but we didn't really have the money to put it forth. So fast forward today, and then with the success of our downtown area and the fact that we do have it in our strategic plan to have some type of means of mechanism of transportation between the convention center and the downtown. So lo and behold, that's how this work session here. So we may talk about a TID, we'll talk about that plan, the corridor, and then the trolley-like type buses. And so I was very fortunate, I guess. David Armijo was reading I think there was, right as I got elected or reelected, the Sun News allowed me to put a guest editorial, and I talked about a few different things, and one of them was this. And so I know that he, in conjunction with the city, worked out a pretty cool looking plan. And so I wanted to share that with you all and see what you thought, and if that's something you wanted to move forward, then we'll discuss ways to move forward. So I don't know, it looks like we have either David Armijo, David Ware, Mandy Gus, and Lynn Gallagher, Richard Hanway, who's going to be discussing. So I don't know who's going to start first. Oh, that's right, Councilor. We need a motion and a second to allow Councilor Gil Sorg to participate telephonically.
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Mayor Pro Tem Gandara, second by Councilor Flores to allow Councilor Gil Sorg to participate via the telephone. So, Christine?
This is on the motion to allow Councilor Sorg to attend the meeting telephonically. Councilor Abeyta Stuvey?
Yes.
Councilor Vasquez?
Yes.
Councilor Bencomo?
Yes.
Councilor Sorg?
Yes.
Councilor Flores?
Yes.
Councilor Gandara?
Yes.
Mayor?
Yes. And Councilor Sorg, thank you for being proactive and not sharing with us your flu. Yeah, we appreciate that very much. That means a lot to us.
Feel better.
No flu. It wasn't flu.
What is it, a cold virus?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
Okay, well, whatever it is, I hope you're enjoying that your stint there in Vegas. I hope it's turning out pretty good. Okay, it looks like David's going to be discussing here.
No, sir, I'm just gonna.
Oh, getting ready. Okay, so,
Thank you. I guess that's my cue. Good afternoon. I'm David Armijo, the Executive Director for the South Central Regional Transit District, and I get the opportunity to come before you today and give you a little bit of a story, a little bit of a vision, hopefully a little bit of a message on what we think we can do in El Paseo. So with that, we believe that transportation, or better said, mobility, can help bring economic development. I'm going to take you through a few slides, a little bit of a vision.
excuse me, Dave, before you
Yes.
begin, can you just briefly, because we have two new council members, a
Oh.
little bit what you do currently and what you used to do, because you used to do this stuff in your other life.
Thank you very much. Well, two parts, because I always say this when I meet people sometimes for the first time, although some of you I think I've known for a bit. I'm actually was born and raised in Las Cruces. Now, I must say I was taken at 9 months of age, and I was raised in the El Paso Independent School District, so I have that behind me as well. But I have family here. I've been here for several years since I've returned, and I bought a home, and so this is going to be where my final destination is going to be. And I say that because as I go through this presentation today and tell you a little bit more about myself, I am the executive director. I was brought in to start the bus system here in the region. And oftentimes we overplay or underplay who we really are. So the transit district was created by state ordinance. There's 4 of us in 2006. And it was created not to be a bus company per se. It was really created to make connections and bring people together. And so with that said, we look at this opportunity and what's already been devised for the El Paseo corridor as an opportunity. And that's what I'm here to do today. Now, with that said, I also have 37 years of transit experience. I've worked in 4 different states. I have put together a number of these little hopper buses or scheduled shuttles. There's a lot of different ways of doing it. But the key to most of the success as I go through this presentation is finding something that's unique and convenient to the community. And I think that's the challenge we have before us. So with that, hopefully I know what I'm doing. Oh, the slides work. So you all know the El Paseo blueprint. And one of the key elements of that when that was devised almost a decade ago as we go forward was that there was going to be a shuttle. And why is a shuttle important? Well, there has to be a way to connect people and a way to have people with mobility. That's critical to every way we do. I can say this as having grown up in this region that transportation and mobility has changed dramatically. People are looking for ways to get around for a number of reasons, and we're going to take you through that here in just a second. But we do believe a shuttle can be a catalyst for bringing about redevelopment and economic development in this region. We'll show you why in a minute. So I grabbed this photo because I thought this is really great. This is your downtown. This is all the people come out. I know I go downtown all the times on the weekends and on Wednesdays when they have the market. But it's a very exciting way of bringing people together. And that's what transportation does. It moves people, it connects people. And the shuttle we're going to show you here in a moment, we're looking at connecting the downtown through Main Street, El Paseo, to the university. We see the catalyst, the bookends of the downtown university as being critical to bringing people together. We also see that connecting the residents, you have all these opportunities, new restaurants, new pubs, shopping, and things that are already occurring in the downtown. We want to make more of that and help provide these opportunities to stimulate this development in this corridor. Now, the shuttle itself, as you can see here in blue, now, how is this different than the Roadrunner services we have now? Well, it's different because we're looking at making this a 15-minute frequency. If shuttles are going to work, you really want it to be high frequency where you just walk out. Yes, we'll have schedules. Yes, we'll have Wi-Fi on the buses and people will have it in their hand where the buses are going. But it's even better when you have that on the bus stop and you can see that it's coming and going all the time. That's where it's really going to be important. Also working with our partners for after hours, and we're going to talk a little bit more of that, of how we use other services. The buses I'm going to show you too, and these slides are coming ahead, are clean burning. We see the commitment that the city has to energy. The district, we just ordered, I just came from California where we have a couple of our buses being built right now, so we're going to have hybrid electric coming in by August, September this year, and I know you have plans to have 5 of those vehicles all electric, and that's great. So we want to look at that possibility of how we could do clean energy and build that into the system from day one. But we believe free and frequent trips will be really critical to that, and it'll be important to integrate everything in the corridor, because when we're looking at active transportation, we're looking at ways of moving people, we're looking at bike lanes and all the other pedestrian access points. Now, transit amenities. Some of the transit amenities that people look for. People are looking at digital world that we have now. They're looking for, I can pay my fare off the board, but of course this is going to be free, so that won't be an issue. But making connections to other buses will be. And so having real-time access to the schedules, having that on the bus line and on the bus is important. Every bus with Wi-Fi so people can do whatever work, and bike racks and so on. All those things would be very important. Now, vehicles can be a number of things. I'm going to show you a few designs here in a moment. This particular vehicle on the left is from a university campus in California, and this is actually an all-electric bus. So you can get them in different sizes. They're also, shuttle buses can be something as small as a van or a mid-sized bus. But we think a themed vehicle has benefit. In fact, when I was at the factory, the bus on the right, the trolley was actually a similar one was there that was being built. And so that one, if you look, actually has 2 doors. That actually runs on electric energy. So that's an electric-powered trolley. And those are available from 2 or 3 different companies around the country that could make those available to us. Now, Scottsdale has a trolley system in there near downtown that's running very much on an hourly basis. Now, why themed vehicles? Because themed vehicles as a vision is something that people can recognize. So there's a lot of different ways of doing that, maybe a color coding or whatnot, but we like that opportunity. Santa Fe has a shuttle. In fact, what's great about the Santa Fe one, if you Google it, you can bring up your schedule, you can see all the information that's there, and they run these kind of mid-sized vans. Very similar to Roadrunner's paratransit type service, and we run some of those mid-sized buses too. But the door is open to what that vehicle could be. And there's actually now electric vehicles in the same vintage that are now available as well. So funding, because how do we fund this? You have to have a funding plan. Well, one of the advantages that the district has right now is we have a multitude of funding sources. And so those are kind of things we would look at and work with our regional partners. And those partners could include New Mexico State University, which you already have a shuttle on campus, and some of that's being funded, the Chamber of Commerce, all these different opportunities. And there's a lot of legislative support. We did very well for the district, and I know the cities and counties this go around with our legislature and looking to have some funding there. The Department of Transportation has a number of funding sources, including the Environmental Protection Agency or Energy Department, where you can get money for clean energy vehicles. And of course, advertising could also be another way of generating some revenue. I think at this point in time, what's most important when you have a concept is you need to form a task force. You need to bring people together and start to work out the plan. What can you do? When can you do it? And where are we going to get the resources to do it? Also, most importantly with that, what's the timeline? Because we don't want to wait another 5 or 10 years. We want to see what we can get going within the next year. And then, of course, we want to be able to communicate that vision. I find it's very helpful to have community meetings. It's amazing what you learn from the public. We have a lot of really exciting retired individuals that are scientists and people from everywhere else who have some great ideas. So I think being able to get more of that going would be something we want to do. So having a task force that could form with representation from the city, the county, and even the Chamber of Commerce and other groups would be a way to go. This completes my presentation at this point. We're more than happy to engage in any conversation or questions you may have.
Thank you, David. Questions of David? Councilor Vita-Stuvey and Councilor Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Armijo. Are we looking at any specific times yet of where we want to see this running for how late that it would run for?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Not only how late, but how often. You know, some services are only 5 days a week, and if you want a service like this, you're probably going to want maybe something that's different during the week than you have on the weekends. The weekends might be a broader time schedule. I think that one of the things that we're all beginning to look at, and I didn't show it here, but there are 8 cities around the country that are doing what we look at autonomous vehicles. So this is a fairly short run. That might be a couple of years down the road, but that could be something that takes care of the after hours, and then you have regular hours during the week. Again, 15-minute frequencies and so on. So you could do this within a 1 to 2 bus type of system. I think that's for the task force. I think that's something you want to bounce back to the community as well as certainly the business community. I'd certainly like to see the landowners along Paseo participate in that as well as the university. And of course, the university has its own shuttle, so that could play into this too as an additional connection.
Thank you, and I'm really glad to hear about that willingness to work with the university too. We do have, a ton of dorms, we have Pan Am just at the other end of University. And I think it will be really important as we move on to have great conversations about making sure that we connect the two. And just to make sure that we are able to take those students and get them into the community. I think there's a lot of opportunity to do some really great things with them. And so I hope that they are invited just as importantly as our retirees to those community meetings.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Vasquez?
Thank you, Mayor. So I don't want to put the cart before the horse on this discussion. I think to me, the impetus for this working is actually having an El Paseo that's desirable, to have stops along the way to downtown. And I would think that we would invest more of our energy into that, and then the transportation piece comes later. But I did notice, as Councilor Beta-Stuvey mentioned, that the stop you had on your diagram was at Union and University, which is not, where a lot of, especially students that live in student housing, congregate in particular. So being strategic about those stops, if this were to be an option as part of the corridor redevelopment, would be important. The theme vehicles, I know that the mayor's been talking about the trolleys, but also an electric bus, right? So are there electric trolleys?
Yes, there are. In fact, the one you saw on the right, that is an actual electric vehicle. Okay.
And then the other piece too is, I think, the student population at New Mexico State University probably has would have a lot of input of what kind of experience they would like to have as part of their transportation to the downtown. So I figured that would be one of the first stakeholders to reach out to if we are envisioning that they will be the primary users of this public transportation. So making sure that that's established, perhaps through a committee from student government, or I don't know, the business department, or some folks who might be able to participate proactively from the university to lend input. As I would hate for the city to put something out there for students that they'll never use because we didn't talk to them. So just some comments on that. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Those are all very good
Thank
questions. And in fact, it'd certainly be our intent to go further into the university. I think we showed this initially because we know there's already a shuttle at the university, so we might want to work those two together and try to find some efficiencies. But I absolutely agree with you. We need something that's more in line with what the university students are looking for, and perhaps what's available after hours. I know there's the DWI program that participates somewhat with our local cab company and some other groups to help offset. We want to keep those young people out of driving if they're going to some of those pubs or places along this route. So I think those are things that can be decided and discussed a little bit further. We wanted to really show the core of what's available, what we think can do. Right now, you don't have that option. You're not really able to go point to point at a fast rate. So you don't have that encouragement of those services. And I think that needs to be part of the planning that maybe Roadrunner does, and certainly even our transit district. But I think what we can do is come back with more details as we go forward. And again, having some community outreach would be very helpful, certainly with the university and certainly with the business community as well.
Thank you. Councilor Bencomo?
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Armijo, for that. So a couple thoughts. I mean, I think this is a great idea. I definitely agree with Councilor Vasquez on how do we ensure that we're also investing in just a better El Paseo in general. But my comments are on this particular idea, though. I think also what brings up something I was thinking about was safety and ensuring that, so if we're thinking about starting it at the convention center on University, I'm not sure. I feel like this is a really good place for university students, particularly young women, to be part of this conversation. If these trolleys are going to be running later at night, I think that the connectivity to the university should be closer than the convention center, where students actually live, which is on the other side of the university, right? Have those things been considered?
Yes, again, this is a kind of initial core. If you actually look at the 10-year plan, it goes back, there was 2 very large loops and there's a lot more routing. That's probably something we would build to. We would work with that. I can tell you that one of the reasons I liked the convention center when I saw that option is, having worked in Dallas for a number of years, we had 3 what we called hopper buses, and we actually had them named the rabbit, the frog, and they would actually make those noises when they came in and did that. I was a planner then. This is ways back. I wasn't as enthusiastic until I started writing it. And what I began to understand is that these shuttles have different unique characteristics. For example, our morning shuttle from the convention center was actually used to bring employees into the downtown. Now, as the downtown becomes much more successful, parking is going to become more and more of a premium. So if you have an opportunity where you can shuttle people within 15 minutes, many of those companies may very well look for that aspect of, well, that'd be good because we have more parking out there, or we'll build more parking somewhere down the road. So that can be one viable option. The second one is to be able to have, we had a very heavy frequency lunch shuttle. So we moved people throughout the downtown into the West End where all the restaurants were. It was a business opportunity and economic development. Today, if you go downtown Dallas, you find housing, villages, everything else has been built. And honestly, a lot of that came from that project, the light rail system, and other elements of transportation. So you kind of caught in a situation, well, if you build it, will they come, or do we wait? You know, you can go both ways. I think the reality it comes to is, what can we do now to help that business community, and what can we do to bring El Paseo back and bring it forward to what it could be? And I think the transportation could be a viable option. It will certainly need a lot of work with the university, because that's a major player in this. Those students, many of those students are here from all over the country and internationally. They don't have transportation. Mm-hmm. So they're going to be a major element to this. And what's really incredible for transit, they're the ones we need during the off-peaks and on the weekends and at night. That's what helps offset your employer-based part of it. So I think there's a lot of room for possibilities for this. I think more dialogue and a more defined plan. You're seeing the concept here today, just the vision. We need an actual plan, and then we'd come forward with that.
Oh, great, thank you. Yes, I just want to make sure that just safety measures are taken into consideration in terms of location, lighting, things like that. My second thought, as you were presenting about this, and I kept thinking about safety issues. I started thinking about I couldn't help it think about our current bus, right? The one that runs every day for everyday people here in Las Cruces, and thinking about how much infrastructure that still needs, right? And thinking about the bus stop in front of the Albertsons on El Paseo doesn't have shade, and it's very highly used bus stop, right? And I mean, little things like that.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would love for us to have a work session around what free public transit in the entire city could look like, as well as accessibility in terms of, I love the idea of an app for this particular trolley, but also for the bus system. So I would love us to have a conversation about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else before we go to public comment? How many of you all here, and since this is our only, Councilor Sorg, did you have anything you'd like to say? Hello? Councilor Sorg? Okay. So I'll probably give everyone 5 minutes to speak. So how many of you would like to at least talk on this initial part, and we'll relax the rules as far as how many times you can speak? Well, this is just this one part here, just to kind of get things going here, get the party started. They don't seem too enthusiastic here. So this gentleman, Don, and then Russ, Mayor Pro Tem Thomas, is that Steve Newby? Yeah, and then I'll start on this side here. Just need you to state your name, up to 5 minutes, please.
Hi, I'm Don Kurtz, and Mayor and councilors, it's great to be here and talk about this. And I don't have any great wisdom. I just think it'd be a great thing to have in the city, and a lot of fun. Connecting NMSU, where there's 15,000 students that are often somewhat isolated from the rest of the city, to come to entertainment venues downtown and jump on it, especially, I travel all over the country. I love public transit, but even I'm scared to get on a bus because I don't know how much it costs. I'm not sure I can handle it. So having free service, I think, would be great. And I second the idea throughout the city. A lot of cities are doing that around the country, and you save on the other end because you're not building as much parking and all those kinds of things. But anyway, I think connecting those two major parts of our city are important. Regular service seems important to me because that way people can start counting on it to go to work, for example, go to school, go to classes, and go the other direction. And all of a sudden, it creates a corridor, in my view, with lots of opportunities for residential things, for seniors, for millennials, for students. and people can come up and down and jump on and off and get back and forth. And this idea of a paseo, which we inherited, is common throughout Latin American cities, where that's a major thoroughfare along which people move and converse with one another. It's a centerpiece. And we can only think of the Paseo de la Reforma in Mexico City, which is exactly that kind of thing. And I picture in my mind all the vans I see going up and down that all the time, carrying people throughout the day and night. So one last thing, I think it helps brand us as a city. And maybe we don't have really interesting lives, but I would say that when people come to visit us, we would take them to visit the trolley. And it'd be fun to get on at one end and ride downtown and the museums and things. So I think it becomes something that's special about the city and special about us. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you my enthusiasm for the project. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Russ?
Mayor, Council, my name is Russ Smith. An exciting idea to talk about, the El Paseo corridor and connecting university and downtown and everything in between. A few things stand out in my thinking of it. When I was a kid growing up, I remember trips that I would take from Oregon to California. Road trips with the family, and one of the destinations was San Francisco. And I do distinctly remember the idea that when we were going to go to San Francisco, we got to ride on the trolley cars, cable cars, yeah. What's so fancy about that? But it caught my mind, it catches the imagination, I think, of so many people. It's a different way of moving. It's a different experience. It was the clang clang. It was the rumble rumble. It was a stop and go. It was the interaction with that which was going by and that which you were riding with. It was distinctive. How to get distinctive in transportation in nowadays is its own challenge. Another idea that comes to mind is the idea of shade. So that if the corridor does create pockets of shade or continuous shade, if the plaza has shade, if destination points have shade, that's really a draw. That keeps coming up over and over and over again. Shade, comfort, a distinct idea. And one more thing to consider from my point of view is, as you're dealing with using a corridor like this, whether it's made beautiful throughout the extent or pockets of beauty, when you use something like this as a passenger getting off at your destination, do you feel like you have arrived? Do you feel like you have come to a place that was important to you? Or do you feel like you got off and that bus took off, or the cars were racing by, or the experience of arriving was less fun? So I think creating that sense of arrival, that sense of destination, and this is worth my time, it's what I looked for, it's what I wanted in the experience, might play a role in all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. Here comes the hardest working lady in Las Cruces, who's retired.
I retired, yes. Good afternoon, Mayor and City Council members. I'm Sharon Thomas. This was one of the first projects I worked on when I was on the City Council. I was in Santa Fe and I ran into Ray Powell. I think you remember him from the State Land Office. And somehow we started talking about this and he said, oh, you should apply for one of these EPA grants. And so we did, and there were a couple of counselors and a couple of planners and some people from the community, and we sent all this in, and then we got a call for a phone interview. So we all got into the conference room and they called, and when we got done, we kind of looked at each other and said, we did okay, you know. And then we got it. We were just terribly surprised, but it was a wonderful time. We had great consultants. All my opportunities to work with consultants in various projects around this city and county, these guys were the best. A couple of young guys from Flagstaff, they got the Realtors Association to buy disposable cameras, and people in the area went out and took 3 pictures of things they liked and 3 pictures of things they didn't like. And then they made all these posters with all the, another thing they did was they had aerial maps and they put kind of tissue paper over it, and people came to that meeting and talked about what they wanted. They had artists there who on the spot drew, and a lot of it was shade, wider sidewalks, some little parks, things like that. And then there was also one of the teachers at the high school brought one of her classes, and they drew in that pedestrian bridge that goes across they were all involved in that. So, I really felt like this plan was incredibly driven by public participation in ways that I haven't seen with very many other consultants. This is sort of like University of Arizona, Councilor Flores and Councilor Gondar. I remember when we rode this kind of a light rail thing, but they have the same problem we have, where their campus and this entertainment area are not right next to each other. So they have this kind of transportation. There's also a private company that has that. Another kind of transportation where everybody can sit on either side and help pedal it and drink at the same time. But it does have a driver. But we really saw how vibrant that area was with that connection to University of Arizona. So I would see things here like how. One problem is I think you'd like to have both housing and commercial. Students would be interested in living there, probably retirees. Michigan State and Indiana University both have big apartment and loft and condos development near their university campus, and a lot of people who went to school there are retiring and living in those residences. So there's 7 pieces of land coming up for zoning tomorrow at the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I don't know what their interests are, but there is some interest in working in that area. Electronic Caregiver is located there. Albert Parra is here from Electronic Caregiver. This is the kind of thing that Detroit did. They got Quicken Loans to come, and then they made their downtown really attractive to millennials. So we have Electronic Caregiver. They're planning on hiring much more, many more people. They're mostly millennials. Could this be places they want to live, or where they want to be? Could it help us attract other high-tech industries along El Paseo? And so then finally, I just would like to say the El Paseo Corridor Plan also has goals and actions, and there's a lot of the planning is done there. It includes things like maybe we need a form-based code for that part of the city. We need to look at maybe complete streets. There was a whole road safety assessment done, and that needs to be implemented, and certainly both the transit and a big emphasis on affordable housing. Thank you.
And just as a reminder, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. We're going to, after we get done with this public comment, there's some more that city staff will present, and then maybe a little bit more comment and go back and forth. Like I said, we've got 5 hours to talk about this. So.
Mr. Mayor, councilors, my name is Steve Newby, partner in Las Cruces
Steve,
Community
excuse
Partners.
me for interrupting. Can you move that podium up so that you can hear a little bit? Right, thanks.
Is this better?
That smooth, soothing voice that I can't.
Yeah. Good afternoon. It's always hard to follow Sherry because she seems to be a subject matter expert in darn near anything. I also had not realized that you all made her an emeritus member of the City Council, and I've been an emeritus member of the downtown organization for about 20 years, and I told her all that means. It's a really nice word for being an old fart. And she kind of laughed. Anyway, by way of introduction for the new counselors, I'm a partner in Las Cruces Community Partners. Our group designed and built the plaza in 16 months. We recently finished the historic renovation and adaptive reuse of the old J.C. Penney building into Retrocade. Project almost killed us, but if you haven't been, you need to go. And we're currently working on downtown apartments, which I think is going to be the next piece that we need downtown, because you have to have people living within walking distance to make a vital downtown. So we really think that will be another piece to the puzzle. On the shuttle, like Sherry, we've studied this, we've talked about it, we've had meetings with New Mexico State University, but I was so pleased to see a work session on this, and you obviously have a great expert in David to make this a reality. A lot of what Russ said about shade and destination is important in any transportation piece, but especially with one that can connect New Mexico State University with downtown. I did like Sherry's comment about you can drink alcohol along the way, and Russ has already volunteered to be the driver, cook hot dogs while they're serving liquor. I think you would have a lot of customers for that. One other piece, though, is the safety aspect. One of the things that Las Cruces Community Partners has learned by doing a large amount of study, hiring a number of experts ourselves, is kind of a rule of 5, that for a downtown to come back from a long history of being pretty much dead, you need 5 restaurants, you need 5 liquor establishments, you need 5 retail establishments. You have to get a synergy and a nexus to make it a place where when people are sitting around with, let's say, visitors, and I ask this question 100 times in many presentations, raise your hand. Last time you had out-of-town visitors, you took them to Mesilla. Everybody. Keep your hand up if you took them to downtown Las Cruces, 1 or 2. Now I think that will be different. But safety then becomes a concern. If you've been to Retrocade at 2 a.m. in the morning when they close, not necessarily everybody is coming up fully sober. The shuttle would solve a lot of that, because by that time of morning, usually the average age is way down to about college age, and being able to simply just get on the shuttle and go back to the university, I think, would be a great benefit to the city as well as to the imbibers. Lastly, many presentations I used to say, this is downtown revitalization and we are here. Did that for years because it didn't move. Finally got Main Street in. Okay, now we're here. It is a long journey. I would say we're more than halfway there. But I learned in a National Main Street Convention in Indianapolis, an incredible speaker said, do you think your downtown is done? And this was to 2,000 people. And he said, downtowns are never done. It's always a journey, that just when you think you're here or even here, somebody moves the bar. I think this piece would go a long way to help us get towards that point, because millennials have a much different way to looking at transportation. Just look at Uber and the impact that has had. And we fully support this idea, and thank you so much for council and staff at looking at this. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Yes, sir.
No, I said thanks, Steve.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Is there anyone else on my left? Mr. Jeffers? I think you had 2 minutes left from the last meeting.
Maybe not.
No, I'm just kidding.
My name is Vince Jeffers. I think you guys have resources already in place, and you just may not be using them wisely. I mean, you invested a lot into that hub over there across the street from La Clinica. I know everybody in this community just loves the word free, and it's thrown around a lot. So if you do it properly, I think it could be a good thing. One of the things that I'm concerned about is it being used properly and the route that it takes. If you want it to be used, why not include more New Mexico State University? They got a huge parking lot on the other end of that university. Instead of going to Convention Center, maybe make it a square instead of a loop. I can tell you from Atlantic City, it worked out pretty well. The jitney, it's called, where you can get from one place to another, and it's pretty quick. And the students at the university use it as well. So if you do it the right way, I think it can work. If you look at it as a way of, well, we can increase this person's land value here, take that person's land and destroy the value and just take their property, then I think it's going to be more of a problem than a benefit. And again, you brought Mr. Newby up, and you guys are still looking at all that as an accomplishment. It's a great one, but if you know the whole history behind that building, Wells Fargo, and it's great the deal that you gave to electronic caregiver, but Randy McMillan and that crew, they got away with a lot. Mr. Newby benefited, as well as other employees or former employees of the city. So it's nice to see the people want to make a difference, but their motives are just needing to be, to help the city and the citizens instead of helping, self-serving. And there's a lot of that, and I'm just hopeful that you guys keep that in mind when you move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. So that, about on my right, first row, second row, third row, fourth, fifth. Yes. Was the gentleman from Electronic Caregiver, did you want to say anything? No? Okay. I think that's Rudy. Is that Rudy? Yeah. Just come forward, please.
Got that short thing going on. Good afternoon, everybody. Usually don't come to these sessions, but this session seems kind of important because it has a long structure of what's going to happen with our transport system.
Excuse me, Rudy, did you
I'm
state
sorry,
your name?
I did not.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that, Mayor. My name is Rudy Ray Aragon. I live at 2615 Crestview, Las Cruces, New Mexico, 88011. Real easy to find. But back to my presentation. Sorry about that. And it's good to see you guys all up there. You guys are doing great work. I've been watching you guys from the sidelines. I've been pretty busy with other affairs. And now that they're all summing up real quick, I have more time to be more involved with my community, as I am a community member and always have been since elementary school when I was a hall monitor and student council president all over the world, as I was a U.S. Army brat married to a doctor, which is now working for Pfizer as a medical liaison. But my thing about with this whole thing is it sounds pretty great. As a person, I was saying before I was interrupted by our mayor for not doing my proper procedure. I rode public transportation and walked around this city for a long time, coming from a person that had 7 vehicles when he moved to this city. And recreational vehicles, motorcycles, boats. You could ask anybody. I had everything before I came here as a master electrician with a journeyman's license that I didn't even need in the state of New Mexico because I just didn't need it. But regardless of what that said, I come here to say how great this is because I am a world traveler with 36 countries on my passport. I have traveled all over America, and these trolleys and bus systems are awesome. And I encourage this very much so, but I encourage to leave it open. So I was so surprised with Ms. Bancomo's let's do the whole bus system. As a person, like I was saying, I've been disabled since 2010 when I came up here and thought I had a mental breakdown. Sir, you remember? I had a stroke. I'm sorry. I've never been sick a day in my life as a Rosebud Sioux. We don't get sick on my reservation. We're the Sioux tribe that fights, and we're civil rights activists. So if you wonder why I got everything where I got, it was all those senators. And it's the same that the senators took all this money away from our school district. They took untold amounts of money away from our schools, these senators. And I'm sure they have their reasons why. But I hope that these senators find it in good grace to provide for our schools. That's also important as this trolley system. But what I believe what this thing should also incorporate, maybe at a later time, is why don't we go up to Dripping Springs on the weekends or something? Make a 2-trip thing. Go take them out over there because, as a Native American, I love all that, and that's federal land, and I'm all about federal. But that would be a good place. We could even get some money probably and help Dripping Springs out and incorporate Las Cruces to a better place. Maybe even build. I know there's a lot of land that's going out there for sale. Usually, I live in a lot of fancy resorts and places, and they have resorts for places like that. So they could go walk out, shoot a couple games of golf, a couple games of hoop, go over there to Dripping Springs and enjoy it. Or how about we make it when the loop that they were talking about? We're doing these horseshoes. Why can't NMSU have 2 or 3 stops and come back this way? Because like I said, I rode this public transit system for a long time because I was disabled and I could barely walk. And so I rode it. And I saw everybody standing out there in the heat and shade and everybody driving by all cool in their air conditioning vehicles while our citizens are sweating and dehydrating in there. But this system here, you guys have a great plan. And with $2 million, I know what I could do with it. I was also taught that it's not necessarily adding more money to fix a problem. We can incorporate a lot to, if everybody's going for the front door and nobody knows about the side door, all the commotion is going to be at the front door. But if we educate people there's a side door for an alternate motive to go into over here, then all of a sudden our influx of people has been dispersed and you have less of a conflict of interest and everybody's happy because everybody's getting what they want. And as far as all this, I would stick to the New Mexico theme and I wouldn't try to change nothing because what are we known for? We're known for our culture, the Gadsden Purchase, stuff like that, history, stuff we can't change. But I reserve my 15 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Rudy. I think that pretty much completes the initial comments on this. So now I think David is going to go to part 2. Councilor Sorg, you still with us? Hello?
Yes, Mayor, I'm here.
Okay.
Listening intently.
You're oh. Did you have any questions of before we go on to the next part?
Mayor, no, I'm going to reserve my comments to the end.
Okay, got it. Thank you. David?
Mayor and City Councilors, good afternoon. I'm David Weir with the Community Development Department, and I'm part of a group presentation by the Community Development Department, the Quality of Life Department, and Economic Development Department. CD will cover some of the history and planning efforts and development that's taken place along the El Paseo corridor. Economic Development will provide an overview of financial incentives or tools that can be used to encourage redevelopment citywide, but it could also be applied to the El Paseo corridor. And then Quality of Life will talk about the transportation services that have been provided to that area and the ongoing planning for the area. Just to familiarize yourself, I'm sure you're all familiar with the area, but we've already had some mention of the El Paseo Community Blueprint. This is the boundaries of that study area, and just to orient yourselves a little bit, the cursor is going down El Paseo. This is the corner of University and Union El Paseo where the convention center is. This area in the center is Las Cruces High School. So this is the Missouri Bouts intersection. Up in this area is Wyatt Drive in the El Paseo area, Albertsons, a former Kmart site. And up in this area is the electronic caregiver tower in the community. And so on the far east side, you basically have Spina. On the far west, you have Main Street, basically goes down to University and then goes up to the Loma Amador downtown corridor. This is a little better map of this. This is the map that was actually provided in the El Paseo Blueprint. It's just a little bit cleaner, but again, it shows you the boundaries of the planning area. Another point you might want to notice is there are other special planning areas. There's the University District to encourage interaction between the university and the city. There's the South Mesquite overlay to recognize that historic neighborhood. The Alameda Depot to recognize the historic district on the west side of the downtown, and the downtown has some special planning that's taken place for it also. This is just a timeline for your reference. Basically, you can see that Mayor Pro Tem Emeritus talked about the picturing El Paseo and the El Paseo corridor blueprint. You see both of those started in the 2010, 2011, 2012 time frame. And if you bring it up today, just last Tuesday, you adopted the new comprehensive plan for the city, Elevate Las Cruces. One thing that, as community development, we always like to talk about is the other plans that apply citywide that would also apply to this area. I just mentioned Elevate Las Cruces, but we've also done citywide planning related to active transportation, pedestrian, transit, bicycle efforts, affordable housing, citywide. The consolidated plan is the instrument that's required for to use federal monies. Just this past summer, you adopted a new Parks and Rec plan that would also impact this area and the city. There's already an infill development plan to incentivize redevelopment and reinvestment in the area. And then back at about the same time, the City Council adopted a complete street policy for all development throughout the city. So just wanted to highlight that there's planning going on citywide, and those policies and efforts would apply to this area also. And just kind of to reinforce that, you can see this is the future development map from Elevate Las Cruces. You can see it specifically calls out El Paseo as a corridor that the city needs to pay particular attention to. The active transportation plan also shows the importance of this area from a pedestrian standpoint, and also the need to make bicycle and transit improvements. Getting to the actual planning that took place for the El Paseo corridor, back in, you've already gotten a little bit of description of how the planning effort started. The city did receive an EPA grant to look at smart growth applications to communities. There was also further outreach in which the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Department and the U.S. Department of Transportation joined that effort and provide technical assistance to this planning area. And the results from that, not only did we have a vision and a manner of encouraging a kind of grassroots planning where the neighborhood folks that would be involved with it would become engaged in ways that the city could encourage that. We also did an assessment of road safety, and also did a preliminary study of properties and redevelopment potential, and are there any brownfield properties that would need additional review before they could be redeveloped. The actual results of this first phase, this Picturing El Paseo, was, and a vision was adopted for that area. There was a report from this project that put forward all the engagement activities that the city could utilize, and many of them they used, whether it was promotion, there were visioning exercises. You already heard an example where the cameras were provided to provide that input. We had workshops in which people came in and did preferences of what type of community they would like to see, what type of improvements they'd like to have in that area. And then at the result of that, this effort was nominated to the New Mexico APA chapter, and we did receive recognition as innovation in public engagement because of that effort. One of the other things that came out of that result was a call to go the next step. And so at that time, the next thing that staff did was undertake the community blueprint. That had been recently adopted, and so this was one of the first areas we went through that process. This slide kind of goes over the goals that were for that, and you've already hit on some of them. To make this a safe, user-friendly corridor, one that you'd want to go to, encourage the mixed land uses, provide a variety of housing types so that it provides for everyone within our community. The desire to further explore flexible building, flexible development codes, what could be done to improve the aesthetics or the appearance of that area, making it a destination within the community. And then the desire was to make sure that this was all done in a sustainable manner. We started, there was some, in the Picturing El Paseo, there was discussion of the green infrastructure and ways to plan and construct your infrastructure so that it be more in tune with nature and the environment that you're in. And then also healthy community designs, meaning that you have an opportunity where you can live, shop, play, go to school all in the same area where you wouldn't need to go very far from your community. Basically, traditional neighborhood development was encouraged. Actions from that, you've heard again a little bit of this also. There was a desire to look at way you could create a flexible development code to encourage reinvestment in that area, whether it be a form-based code or if there was some hybrid going forward with that. There was a call for redesigning it so you had a complete street. So you had one that dealt with the ability to handle and accommodate pedestrians, transit, bicycles, and your auto. It was to implement some of the improvements that were called out in that road safety audit, and then also to implement some of the best practices from the Institute of Traffic Engineering. It's a guide on what, and they were changing some of the recommendations they had for urban streets. Advanced the integration of transit and making sure that any planning done in this area made sure that that was a viable option for transportation. And it kind of touched on also encouraging a mix of housing and affordable for all segments of the community, and doing that with the utilization of green infrastructure. And then last, exploring what type of incentives you could encourage redevelopment, reinvestment in the area. After that was adopted, another opportunity came to the city to continue developing in this area. Portland State University had a program called the Urban Sustainability Accelerator, and it was the particular theme for this was university and city joint projects. The city put forward the El Paseo blueprint, and it was accepted. And so this was again, it was technical assistance. It wasn't anything that Portland State did to us, but it allowed us to work with peer universities, or excuse me, peer cities that had similar desires for an area of their town. And also they provided an opportunity for us to go to Portland itself, look at some of the urban sustainability, some of the redevelopment that they have done. There was also a trip to the San Diego area and La Jolla and looking at the complete streets. So it was an opportunity to look at how to implement the plan itself. Some of the resulting work from that, a complete street workshop was held in which some of these concepts were provided, where input was taken from the businesses, the stakeholders, the residents of the area. New Mexico State University, their civil engineering program, had project teams put together where they actually put together a cross-section of a street, and where they said, if the city were to redesign it, these are various options to consider. How would you improve basically the urban design? What type of landscaping? How would you incorporate the sidewalks? How would you create a mixed-use corridor? The other thing that took place was a person that was introduced to the city was this Michelle Reeves. She is a consultant for basically startup businesses and incubator type of situations. And so she provided a workshop or an event where she discussed how companies or businesses that she's worked were successful taking vacant or underutilized properties and being very successful with different projects in that area. And she showed examples when we were in Portland, and then she actually came down and visited sites and had her expertise available for anyone that was interested in consulting with her. The whole time I started the presentation with the timeline. So while these engagements were taking place, there were a lot of activity that did take place on El Paseo. Some of it may not be related to it, but we would hope that some of the conversations that took place encouraged some of the redevelopment. So this slide just kind of highlights that. The El Paseo Plaza, where Crunch Fitness is now, they went through a total facade renovation. Some of the landscaping was improved in that area, and it's still undergoing reuse of that. Las Cruces High School, if you recall at that time, the school district was looking at possibly converting the use of the high school, and through the discussions, they decided to go ahead and renovate that property. One of the concepts that was discussed through the engagement was the Sky Bridge, and so you see that coming to place. During this whole time frame, the Kmart property was closed, but it's currently been repurchased by a local church, and it's in the process of reuse and re-subdivision of it. The first kind of project you see from that was the Dion's Pizza. The church itself is looking at the landscaping and improving of the parking area right now. And then I'm not sure this had anything to do with the results of the plan, but it was certainly guided by it when they did some facade renovations at Brazito Plaza, where Albertsons is. You saw the facade change, you saw the landscaping that by that time was informed by these planning efforts that took place. Infrastructure improvements itself, there was that road safety audit. So there were several changes along the corridor for the intersections. In particular, Idaho, Avenida de Mesilla. You saw the Idaho road diet when it went from 4 lanes to 3 on the west of El Paseo. You saw the medians
that were installed at the various intersections. You saw additional striping of crossings. You saw a hawk system down by Las Cruces High School for the students to cross from one side of the street to the other. And then there's ongoing pavement management and safety enhancements of just as a part of the regular maintenance of the street area that, again, was informed by this plan and the studies that took place. With that, I will hand it over to Mandy Gus to provide information on the tools for you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. I'm Mandy Gus with the Economic Development Department. And so today I wanted to talk to you about some tools that we could potentially use to help develop El Paseo Corridor. One of the things I want to talk about, as you know, in the state of New Mexico, sometimes we're challenged to provide incentives because of the anti-donation clause in our state statute and so, or in our state constitution. So some of the things that we are allowed by state statute are tax increment development district, public improvement district, business improvement district, metropolitan redevelopment area, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on what each of those is and how they may or may not work for this area. And then along those lines, some non-financial options. So first thing is a tax increment development district. A tax increment development district can provide GRT and property financing for public infrastructure, and it supports economic development and has to have a job creation component. It's a funding mechanism for construction, operation, and maintenance of public infrastructure that's within the boundaries of the TID. And the investments are paid for with an increase in property tax or GRT that comes from the development. So that is what the increment means. How does a TID work? There has to be a majority landowner vote in the district for it to come to fruition. There will be a GRT and property tax baseline set. And then as revenues are generated and reinvested in that district, you hope to see what is shown in this chart where you have that baseline. That baseline always continues to come to the general fund of the city, and then the increment financing goes back into that specific district. From a TID's perspective, there are no new taxes. The tax rate remains the same in the area, but it's distributed differently. And as there's an increment, the growth that comes from the increment, not from a higher tax rate. So what areas are best suited for TIDs? Ones that have a lot of underutilized or empty space, because there's currently no GRT or property tax or low property taxes being there. There has to be an increment potential, because the increment is where the money comes from to reinvest into the TID. And it has to be an area that needs public infrastructure needs, because the TID has to pay for public infrastructure, not private. A best practice for determining if a TID is appropriate is the but-for test, and that means that the development would not have happened in that area but for the TID. And so as we're looking at El Paseo, we have to determine if it is an appropriate place for a TID or if it does not meet some of these criteria. And then just, we're all, City Council is familiar with TIDs because we do have a TID currently in Las Cruces in downtown. And so I wanted to give you just a timeline of that. The resolution of intent to create the TID came in 2007. The election was in 2008. At that time, the city did ask for both county and state shared portion of the increment, which was approved in 2009. One of the reasons that downtown was a good candidate is there's a lot of city-owned real estate, which means it was not paying any property tax. And so the idea was that we could develop these and start putting increment into it. And some of the completed projects that have been paid for with TID funding are the Plaza de las Cruces, the church water conversion project, and then the Amador project was paid for half by the TID, half by the general fund. One of the things that I would like to make sure you all are aware of is that we no longer receive the state shared portion of the GRT increment. That was by design. We knew we would only get that for 10 years, but it has significantly reduced the amount of money that we're bringing in to the downtown TID. So some other options. One is a public improvement district. There are no public improvement districts in Las Cruces. There is one in Rio Rancho, and in Rio Rancho it's being used to pay for some water and wastewater infrastructure. There has to be an application for the public improvement district, and then at least 25% of the real property owners participate in that application. You go through a public hearing and election process similar to TID, but the PID then establishes and imposes and collects special levies on property tax to fund those infrastructure improvements or services. Here I have a list of some examples of that. And generally that levy is on the property tax for about a 20-year period. Similar to a TID, a PID would have its own governing board, and that can either be chosen to be the existing governing body of the city, or it can be appointed by the governing body of the city. Moving on, another tool could be a business improvement district. We don't have any business improvement districts in Las Cruces, but there is one in Gallup, which is considered, it has to be managed by a committee or a 501c3. That's what they do. They have a 501c3 for their bid, which is in their downtown district. The bid comes as a petition from the property or business owners in the district. There, again, has to be a notice and public hearing, and then there'll be an assessed business improvement fee on either the property or on the businesses. It does require a management committee to operate that district, and it is reviewed by City Council every 5 years to determine if it is still needed and should remain in existence. They can finance additional and extended services to the businesses and also local improvements. So another tool that's available to us through state statutes is the Metropolitan Redevelopment Area. The Metropolitan Redevelopment Area was created as a way to rehab and redevelop deteriorated slum and blight and underutilized areas. The eligibility for to find out if a place would be appropriate for an MRA is high unemployment or low income, low business activity, deteriorating buildings, a lot of zoning conformity issues. And the way that it is determined to be eligible is you have a professional planner or architect come in, establish conditions, and then designate the area as appropriate for an MRA. Once a designation is set, we would move forward with an MRA plan. And the MRA plan can designate specific projects to eliminate that blight. Some examples of projects would be land and building acquisition. We have some flexibility within an MRA to purchase land and then sell it instead of at market value at what would be considered by the state fair value. And so you can give some consideration to price if it helps reach the goals of the MRA plan. It helps you to do some demolition, zoning regulations. You could do transportation improvements, cultural and community facilities. That's often used in downtown areas and other parts of the state, and housing projects. The big advantage of MRA, of course, is that it eases some anti-donation restrictions and allows development agreements with the private sector. An example of how we're using that here in Las Cruces is our Renovate Main Street program, which allows us to put into place some agreements where we pay contractors a portion of a project to help renovate or put in new infrastructure for businesses. It allows us to do public-private partnerships where we can leverage private money with private money, like we did with the Amador project. It also helps us revise our zoning regulations and some incentives, and gives us some opportunities for other funding, the tax increment financing. We used the MRA in Las Cruces to help us get ready for the TID. It's not required to put in a TID. But we used it that way. There's also some bond financing, CDBG, and brownfield funds. And again, we do have an MRA in Las Cruces. It is a downtown. The boundary was adopted in 2006. The plan was created in 2007. And then some of the projects that we completed based on that plan or not is the Downtown Development Code was adopted in 2016. There were some transit connections done to NMSU, which I know our transit team's going to talk to you a little bit more about. There was a project talking about the importance of east-west streetscape improvements. We got some of those done with the Church Water project in our Callecitas. It talks about the importance of facade improvements, which we've started to do with the Renovate Main Street incentive plan. Dining and retail, the need for recruiting dining and retail establishments, which we've seen a big emphasis on, and we've been very successful in bringing more dining and retail to our downtown in the last couple of years. And another goal is shared parking structures, which we're still working on. And so what I wanted to just bring to your attention is the boundary was adopted in 2006, the plan was created in 2007, and we're still working through a lot of those goals even today. And so those are the tools that are given to us with the state statutes. There's also some non-financial options of ways that we can focus on El Paseo, engaging with the businesses for their input, their needs, trying to figure out what they want to see. We can target our BRE efforts. BRE is business retention and expansion. So we can target the businesses in that area, again, understanding their input and their needs. There are some communities that have done business walks, and that can either be from the city perspective or working with partners, with our partners with the chambers or other types of businesses. And a business walk would be an actual scheduled event where elected officials or other business owners go, and we go to each of the businesses in that area to spend money, to walk through, give them foot traffic, all of the above. That potentially we could work with the businesses if they wanted to set up a merchants association. Obviously, that wouldn't be necessarily driven by the city, but we could help them with the tools to get that going. We could also do some temporary pop-up projects that could be business focused, such as like a food truck event. We could partner with some businesses there. An example would be the church. That used to be where the old Kmart was. They have some free space. Would they be open to working with businesses doing some pop-up retail? We could also do some pop-up projects that are not related necessarily to retail, but instead to like the streetscapes. Could we do some temporary layouts with temporary barriers to see how those would be, how those would work and how they would change the look of El Paseo? And so with that, I will hand it off to Richard in Quality of Life.
Thank you, Mandy.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'd like to start off with a little nostalgia, I guess, history on transit.
Excuse me, do you mind stating your name more?
Richard Hanway. I am the Transit Operations Supervisor here at the city. Roadrunner Transit actually started out as Las Cruces Area Transit, 1986. This was a flyer that we had found in our history books, so I figured you guys might like that. There were 4 original routes that started in the city that actually included NMSU. NMSU had 1 route at the time. The operating hours were 6:15 to 8:30 p.m. On weekdays. They had 5 buses that started to run the whole system, and there was no dial-a-ride at that time. Dial-a-ride actually started in 1987 with 2 vehicles. By April of '87, there were actually 6 routes that were incorporated. Current transit services. We have fixed route. We have 10 routes that are in the city at this time right now at peak service. That includes the Aggie routes. There are 13 buses that run at peak service. Dial-a-ride is our ADA complimentary paratransit and senior transportation. We have 13 vehicles that operate in peak service on that. Our ridership for last year for fixed route was over 560,000 rides provided. For dial-a-ride, it was over 53,000. 66% of dial-a-ride rides are senior transportation. And we currently operate 6:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. Monday through Friday, 9:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. on Saturdays. This is a timeline about the El Paseo corridor blueprint and how transit was involved in that. There was talk amongst transit back in 2012 when we were looking at our short-range plan that we are currently under now. They were talking about doing the El Paseo corridor recommended for transit-oriented development consideration. We had established a long-range transit plan in 2012 that ranked that corridor as number 3 on the list in the city. Our short-range plan in 2016 actually combined 3 of our existing routes that we had prior to 2016 into our current Route 2. What that did was it actually helped connectivity. It combined a Doña Ana shuttle that was going from the mall up to the DACC East Mesa campus, and our Route 20 and 30 that had bi-directional service, but they were all both on an hour headway. So we ended up with three buses on that route, which we currently have now, that gave us 30-minute service on that route. We also followed the city strategic plan transits connecting downtown MSU and the convention center. That Route 2 is exactly what that does at this time. Along El Paseo, downtown, it also goes on Bouts, Espina onto University, and that's the corridor that we run right now on Route 2. The reconfiguration in July 2016, again, Route 2 was a 30-minute service. It combined those 3 routes. We go downtown, El Paseo, Bouts, Espina. It also covers the Doña Ana branch, Tel Shore area, all the major hospitals here in town, and a lot of the businesses and medical offices. Our Route 4 services downtown Mesilla and the convention center along Union and University. Our route expansion in March 2018 added 30-minute service frequency to Picacho, which was part of one of the goals of our short-range plan. We also reintroduced service onto Solano Corridor, which is our Route 8. Service expansion May of 2019 extended our hours of service from 7 o'clock to 10:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. This is a picture of our current downtown, or our Route 2 that we run right now, the area that we're talking about. As you can see, it runs from the downtown area. We reconfigured it out of the intermodal to cover the two-way conversion on Church Street. And it does have stops downtown in that area. It continues on to Campo, onto El Paseo to Bouts, and then along the corridor of Espina to University. One of the reasons why it was reconfigured in the study during the time that we redid this was because there was a lot of housing on that the Espina corridor to connect the people that were living in that area. This is our Route 4. Right now, it currently has 1 hour frequency in the downtown area, which is the intermodal. It is what I'm referring to, but it does serve the convention center. The turnaround point actually is at the convention center, so it would be a 30-minute trip actually from the intermodal to the convention center, just for reference. I included our Route 8 because Route 8 does go along the Solano corridor. It boundaries the area of El Paseo and one of the major throughways through there. It is actually one of our strongest routes that we have in the system today. I do have some numbers right now. Route 2 is actually running as our second highest with monthly service, about 3,900 per bus. That's per bus. Route 8 is about 5,900.
Is this a month?
On average, yes.
Per month?
Yes.
Okay.
The short-range plan consideration, this is one of the areas that we were looking at in the corridor to add existing service to our route that we already have. One of the possibilities that we could study would be adding another bus onto this part of Route 2. By doing that, if we staggered the times, then we could get 15-minute service out of this on this corridor. So this is one of the considerations that we would be looking at to add to our short-range plan. The cost of the additional service, right now, there wouldn't be a capital cost if we were to do with an existing bus, but if this was going to be a long-term project, there would be capital costs that would need to be incurred. Currently, we have $78 an hour as our operating cost for fixed route. So depending on what hours of service we would want to run at, whether it was a peak service or all day what have you. The $256,000 dollar number is actually running it from 9 to 6, Monday through Friday, and I think till 10:30 on Saturday. Remaining short-range plans goals, realigning transit routes, we had already done that. That was one of the major topics that we have on our current short-range plan. We've already completed that. We increased frequency to West Picacho by 30 minutes. We've done that. Solano service has been reestablished. It is on an hour headway, but we do have service on Solano again, and we have extended weekday hours of service. What is remaining on our current plan is Sunday service addition and our Saturday service expansion. Those are the two things that are left on our current plan. This 2020 short-range plan is something that we have just embarked on. Actually, it went to council for acceptance. We are in the plan or in the stage of planning right now. Some of the things that we are talking about looking at are to assess the effectiveness of current routes, to identify service gaps in the next 5 years, improvements of dial-a-ride and senior transportation, recommend technology implementation, and recommend bus stop improvement plan. These are the things that we have vetted through NMDOT. They are our partner. They are funding 80% of our study. And any changes to this plan, we would need to vet through them again as well. So with that being said, I will stand by for questions after the presentation. I'll turn it back over to David.
Yeah, thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Mayor and City Council, the presentations include a lot of information for you, but just something that I know that you're all aware of, but you can see that the city plays a major role and has a large influence on this corridor, whether it be guiding development and investment, whether it be managing the public services that are provided by the city, whether it's maintaining and improving the public infrastructure. And then, you know, a big thing is just the partnering with the various individuals that are impacted by that corridor, whether it be residents, businesses. We've already touched on New Mexico State University, Las Cruces Public School System, but we also have nonprofit providers that operate out of this area. Elephant Butte Irrigation District has infrastructure that goes through this corridor. And so all of these things that the city is involved with, and with the intent of assuring that it's a vibrant, safe, and productive area of the city. So we have, the city participates in an organization called Strong Towns, and it demonstrates the benefits of by investing in your established neighborhoods and reinvesting in those. We have a series of clips to get to the discussion. I won't go through them, but they are embedded in this presentation, and it's a great resource for you to look at if you want to see what some other communities have done when they've reinvested in their downtowns and their corridors. And we wanted to end the presentation by kind of laying some considerations that kind of feed out of the presentation that we've made. You've seen the planning that's taken place, the activities that have been encouraged over the last 10 years, that we really want to see this area redeveloped with a complete street, meaning that it's aesthetically pleasing, that it handles the environmental conditions, that it addresses all the needs of all the users, whether it be the business, whether it be homeowners, whether it be renters, whether it be someone that uses the corridor as a walker, someone that drives a car, someone that utilizes transit, or someone who moves around on bicycles. And those are all things that you've done other planning efforts from an active transportation standpoint. How do you encourage that to take place? How do you make it a pleasing area and make it a desirable one for you to visit, work in, live in, provide? And then with the adoption of Elevate Las Cruces, the city has taken a stance that they really want to encourage the increase in use of existing urban areas, to encourage the mix of uses, and to you already have one investment in there. You would like to see continued reinvestment in those areas. And so that's something that you need to consider as you go forward with direction that you provide for this area. The other thing is, you know, this is just one of your areas in the community, and you've done a lot of planning for others. And so you kind of have to balance what the priorities are going to be for those areas and how you go forward with that. And then last, the community has really moved towards providing and maintaining equitable transit systems. So we just wanted to make sure that you heard that from staff, that that's very important to us because we heard it from you. And so with that, I'll conclude the presentation, and there's a multitude of staff here that would answer any questions or provide any additional input that you'd like.
Well, thanks, David, and I appreciate that very much. I'll go to council here in just a second, but it seems like depending on where you start, let's say you start in downtown, so that's District 1, and then as it's moving its way to the university area, which ends up in District 2, it crosses over 3 and 4. So that's pretty good. The only one that's left out is 5 and 6. So, Councilor Sorg, are you still there?
Yes, I haven't died yet.
Okay. All right, good. Just want to make sure. You have any questions before I go to council on the dais?
Well, okay. Yeah, I'm just really impressed in all the presentations and the volume of information that was presented. Everybody did an excellent job of the information presented. I was using the blueprint PDF that was provided to us to follow along with the different parts of the plan, because on the video, the high definition is not there. I couldn't even read some of the graphics that were shown. But yeah, I can see where we need to build the infrastructure. We need to have transit. We need to have housing and other transportation, such as active transportation. And so I understand the whole thing. I've been at this for 8-9 years myself. One thing that came to my mind when David Armiro was talking at the beginning, he mentioned TOD, transit-oriented development, and if I understand that correctly, that means that if you build the transit, the development will come. If that's true, I'll stand to be corrected if I'm wrong. So that's one thing. Oh, and as far as university involvement in this, excellent. We need to do that. There is a person on staff at the university that some of us, at least I was, approached, that wanted to get ways in which the university can be involved in the community, and that's Justin Blessinger. So that's a person to reach out to help with the administration at the university as well as the students. And I totally agree with what's been said about safety, destination, not only to have the downtown, but the destination correctly at the university, and of course shade. We got to have those green leafy trees and all along the corridor. So, Mr. Weir, the timeline of the overview that you gave, activities, that was very, very good. Let me see, there's one more thing. Oh, yeah. I, together with Olga Pedrosa, Councilor Pedrosa, attended the event in San Diego with the Portland State group, and the two other cities that were involved there was Duluth, Minnesota, and Auburn, Alabama, doing the same things we're doing. So there was a lot to learn there, too. So, Mayor, I think that's good for now. I'll let you have it then.
Okay, thank you, Councilor. Those are very good points that you brought up, and I think if we were to move, say, towards a task force to study this a little bit more further, we may want to include, I know I talked briefly with the Chief of Staff, Dan, or VSU's Chief of Staff, Lenny Martinez, about how to encourage the university students to be able to jump on and off, but as well as maybe reaching out to the president, ASNMSU president, to get his feedback. But that's
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
One more thing. As we're talking about all the activities and things to do going forward, I just wanted to emphasize this blueprint has already been done, and I think we don't want to start from scratch. We want to use that as a starting point and go from there.
Absolutely. Good point, Counselor. I appreciate that. And let me just tell you this much, and I know you've seen this because you go to Washington from time to time. Let's take the Metro. And if you remember, they've added a new line there called the Silver Line. And let me tell you something. The hope, especially investors or developers, are interested to see where those stops are, because that is where that land, not only does it increase in value, but it also where they're going to put more apartments and housing, because nowadays, especially those, whether seniors or millennials, if they want to kind of divest themselves from using their automobile, if you stop and think about it, if we have apartments and such housing along this corridor, you've got grocery stores like Albertsons there, you've got the downtown areas for entertainment. I believe they're going to start working on that video for, and I think the Allen Theaters are going to build that up a little bit. You've got all kinds of different things in El Paseo. You know, as a young man growing up here, I remember El Paseo was the business street. It was so expensive to try to get to rent a place on there. In fact, Glenn Cutter's was right there at the corner of Foster and El Paseo. I mean, it was literally almost impossible unless you were willing to pay a lot of money to get your business on El Paseo. And so I just envision it breathing back that life into El Paseo, and I think there's going to be a lot of energy involved if we can move forward on this. So I appreciate your comments. Okay, so Councillor Abate
Mayor, you are exactly right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Abate Stuvi, Flores, and Vasquez, and Bencomo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think, Mr. Ware, that my first question probably can be for you. I could use a little bit of a historical context. It seems like so much energy and resources and time was put into this El Paseo blueprint plan. What were the barriers at the time to kind of move forward on that project? I know funding's always an issue, but what were the reasonings not to kind of readjust to continue with that plan?
Mayor and Councilor Stuve, I think you kind of hit it. I wanted to, in the presentation, show that the actions never really stopped. The improvements at the intersections were desired, were made by the city, and there's been an effort to continue with the improvements, whether it's the street maintenance, working on sewer improvements, working with private investors in that area. Probably one of the things that stalled it was the Great Recession. You had, it was a little more difficult to redevelop areas. I think we're now at an area where you see citywide projects being proposed. And then it's just the balancing of activities and improvements citywide. But I don't think there was ever any desire to stop the city. Whenever I'll talk about community development. Whenever we see a zone change or a development proposal, we always use the plan as a reference point and encourage the actions and the goals being addressed from that manner. And then with the changes that we've made to our capital improvement programming, the plans are reviewed at that time also to help prioritize projects.
Thank you. I always feel if we're going to spend a lot of time and energy on these things, that you definitely want to see projects come to be. And this is something that I think would really be helpful for a lot of people in our community. So that I hope that some of those barriers, are gone, and so that we would be able to see this to its full potential. So thank you.
Councilor Abate Stuvi, also at that time, and gosh, it's amazing that it was 2012. I thought it was like 4 or 5 years ago. Downtown hadn't really come up to where it is today. And so you have El Paseo, and, it was like, but so this is now an opportunity to connect the university area and the downtown area, and then also to address the concerns of Councilor Bencomo and Vasquez that would be like the hub, kind of like when Southwest Airlines flies to Dallas Love Field, and then from there they scatter to different places. And so we'd go to the convention center, and there could be other areas that can go to the dorms or this nature. But this would be the main thing, because think about those conventions that come in and they're wanting to go to downtown. Then now you have a way to get them back and forth. So, and the new hotel, exactly. So we have Counselor Flores, Counselor Vasquez, and, excuse me, yeah. We don't have Flores on here twice. Who's he? Oh, Bencomo, sorry. So Counselor Flores, Vasquez, and Bencomo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Weir. So we're talking a lot about bringing the students to the downtown area. And it seems to me that we have to be thinking about connecting people in the city to the university. And when I was living in Los Angeles, I didn't live very far from UCLA. And I actually had my ophthalmologist at the Jules Stein Center there. And a lot of my friends did, and we would just take the bus. And we just, instead of dealing with parking, because parking used to be 25 cents in the day, back in the day, and now, well, 10, 12 years ago, it went up to $11. So we just jump on the bus for 50 cents and go over to Westwood, and I also had my the School of Dentistry there provides dental services, and I've heard that NMSU has a School of Dentistry as well. But I think that it's imperative that we work closely with the university to find out what the university has to offer the community, so that the community can jump on a bus and we can have people. And then, of course, it's all, I mean, transportation is everything, because parking isn't that great on campus either. And so we need to have, it has to be literally a two-way street, not just, oh, let's bring the students over downtown. Well, what are they going to come downtown to? I mean, on a Friday afternoon to go to Little Toad or something like that? I mean, you know, and I think Councilor Vasquez brought out an excellent point about, and along the same lines as Russ Smith, that you have to have destination points along the way. The destination just can't be to get to downtown. It just can't. I mean, it's not going to work. There isn't that much happening downtown to bring that much. Oh, look, if you had Sonoma Ranch on that, if you had Sonoma Ranch on there, everybody would be going out there. No, I'm just saying that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's a lot going on, relatively speaking, but we're talking, but in the context of making it alluring to the university students, I'm not sure it's going to cut it. You know, that I just might. I think, though, I mean, that's been the focus, and then it's university to downtown and have a wonderful whatever. But I think we really have to focus on getting our people to be using the services the university has to offer, perhaps extension course classes, and just get the and I'm talking about all ages. I'm not talking just about the retired community or anything, but to know that I think that's the beauty of having a university in any town. It makes the town vibrant, and it's an attraction. So to people wanting to live here. So that would be mine. And I think that also Councilor Bencomo brought out a very good point. When I was a student at USC, we had a tram called the Rape Escape. So I was living on 29th Street, I think. I can't even remember. It was so many years ago. But we had a tram that actually would pick us up from points on the campus and then over to where we were living. So so that's a factor too, safety and not necessary, and also I think it was Mr. Armijo or someone else brought up the point that when you have people going downtown and they're going to be leaving, oh no, it was Mr. Newby. He said they're going to be leaving the establishments there and maybe not be sober. So that's another factor too, but not a big factor. But I really, really want to stress how important it is to really integrate our community with the university and have the university totally involved with that whole process, and think of them, because it can't just be so isolated just for students or just for visiting professors or whatever, but to really be offering a lot of things to the community and make it clear to the community that the university has a lot to offer. And as far as Russ's comment about the trolleys in San Francisco, again, back in the day, we'd jump on the trolleys because I lived on Van Ness, and I would just go over to Hyde to get down to McAllister to the law school. And it was only a quarter. And sometimes we didn't even have a quarter. You know, law students, you're on food stamps and scholarships and stuff like that. And we would just jump on, and it just a few blocks down, and so just jump off before they could yell at you. But now the trolleys are actually not functioning that way anymore. The trolleys are actually, it costs, I don't know, either $5 or $15 or $20 to get on just to go from Hyde and McAllister to the Fisherman's Wharf. So it's become a tourist attraction, and people are actually paying. Of course, we don't have a Fisherman's Wharf, but I'm just saying, you know, you never know what one thing is going to turn into. But I really think that we have to stress the university, and Mr. Smith also brought up the same point as Councilor Vasquez, that we have to have interest points along the way. And I don't know, you know, which comes first. Thank you.
Mayor and Councilor Flores, I think staff would support collaboration between the two and understand the ongoing efforts. Ms. Lynn Gallagher has says some examples of kind of what city has done in addressing some of the comments that you made.
Mayor, Councilor Flores, Lynn Gallagher, Director for Quality of Life. Just a couple of points to some of the comments that have been made about transit. So the Roadrunner transit system has taken under, when 2012, the El Paseo corridor blueprint came about, the Roadrunner transit responded in kind by increasing the frequency of stops along the El Paseo corridor for those reasons alone as well. And I'd like to point out that there are 6 stops along the university, one on Union and then on University, that actually connect the students or the residents to the university from downtown. And it's about a 15-minute time frame to get from downtown to the university to downtown, depending on what route you take. So we already have a pretty fast connection from downtown to the university. One of the things that we're doing as part of our strategic business plan that we work on annually is we're trying to change the culture around ridership for bus public transportation services. I too have lived in many other cities and I've used transportation. One of the coefficients, one of the corollaries in all of those other cities is that they have paid parking stanchions, so you have to pay to park your vehicle. So there are also a common denominator and a common theme in that taking public transportation becomes a better avenue than riding and having to pay to park. So some of the things that we are trying to do in quality of life for Roadrunner Transit is look at the short-range plan to say, what are our vulnerable system routes? Where are those gaps? And we want to really create an equitable transit system. When you look at a transit-oriented development, that means that business development springs up around some of those common themes around trail systems, around business districts, about work-life balance, where you can work and live. And so some of those things we're already looking at under the short-range plan. And if we add this consideration to then increase frequency along the El Paseo corridor again, that could be an additional thread. But really what we need to focus on is having a comprehensive, equitable transit system that meets the needs of all of our residents, but also changes the culture and characteristic of why and when people take public transportation. It's very simple for a university student to jump in their car or jump in their car with their friends to take it wherever they want to go in the city, and they don't have to pay to park. So these are some of the considerations as a city that thread into how and why people take public transportation.
Then before you leave, let me just ask you something. So I know there's a couple of these routes that overlap. So if we were to do this And this was really more consistent. I mean, and this is, I think one of the speakers said, you know, they would love to take public transportation when they go out of town, but kind of fumble through it. You don't know how much it's going to cost. You don't know where it's going to go. I mean, this is a dedicated route that goes back and forth, you know, where it goes from between the convention center, the university, or wherever, you know, whatever. You know, I was hoping that we can at least have a task force to kind of iron out some of the comments that were made here. But if you had one that was very consistent from 6 o'clock, whatever time in the morning, till 10:30 or later, couldn't we? We're probably going to have to reconfigure the lines, because why have two of them when you can just stop at one end and go to the other, and that way there, if you need to get down to a particular area, just after you stop in District 2 or whatever, and you just jump on this particular trolley and you go wherever you need to go. And so not only is that allowing the residents at large from the city, you're also eliminating and probably saving some money doing it this way. That, as well as there's a lot of residents that live in one area of the city that could use some shopping or do some other things and just go back and forth, because I know there's some apartments on Montana. There's a senior area that's off of Foster that I think could also utilize that as well. So but getting back to the question, wouldn't that be something to look at, to eliminate that and just use that as, when you're going through El Paseo, this is what you use. All the other ones, you just have a different configuration to jump on.
Mayor, one of the considerations that they would look at in the short-range planning process is that assessment and that gap, and how are we connecting, you know, the Solano area, the corridor more north on 70 becomes a consideration as we look at how do we bring people from where residential locations are into business districts. And so that is something that can be considered, but it has to be considered as part of that short-range planning to say, what is the gap analysis? Where do we have a gap now? What do our current route configurations connect us? Where do they connect? We have several connections. You can take any route along our current 8-route system and connect to downtown and be 15 minutes away from university, if that's the council's goal. And so the short-range planning process looks at the entire system, and it says, what is the city grown? How has the city grown this year? And how do we need to grow with it and shift that? And then what does that cost?
Right, great. But again, that's what I think a task force would take a look at, so we can get this ironed out, and then come back to council and say, okay, here it is, figure out the cost. But I have to, and I've heard this from, I don't know, for the last year or two, that we have these different routes that go through the city, but I'll be candid with you, there's no way I would do that. I wouldn't, because one doesn't go to where, what if I don't need to go where I need to go? That means I got to get off of one route, then I got to jump on another one and take a third one to get to where I want to go. That's the way I look at it. Okay, yeah. Well, there you go, 2 hours for, yeah, so, really? When you rode, okay, well, this saves you an hour and 45 minutes. Okay, well, I appreciate those comments, Lynn. Thank you. Questions now for Councilor Vasquez? Oh, I'm sorry, we still have, Councilor Vasquez and then Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. And thank you to Lynn, David, Mandy, Richard. I just want to start by saying that I was fresh out of college. I was a graduate in 2008 and wrote a story in 2009 as the business editor of the Las Cruces Bulletin about this project right when it was kicking off and the charrettes were happening. And I remember that during my time on campus, El Paseo was where the fast food was at, right? That was really why students went there. It was because that's where McDonald's and Taco Bell and Wendy's was all really close to each other, and they stayed open after 1 a.m. or something like that. And so that's my impression of El Paseo as a student in terms of how much I interacted with that particular part of the city. And I was so excited to learn that the city was going to take on this project as part of this EPA and HUD grant. And I remember thinking, man, in 10 years, this area is just going to be awesome, right? Because the plans that we saw, I think, that were included as part of this presentation, right, with the improved sidewalks and the trees and the green spaces and the lively, vibrant business community. I've been waiting for it ever since, and I think it's only deteriorated probably more since that time. I think it was actually more vibrant then than it is today. So I do have to agree, and with Councilor Beta-Stubbe's concerns about man, we spent a lot of time, a lot of energy. We even got this amazing grant that we were recognized for after the planning process was finished, and maybe haven't really seen it through to realization. I know we have limited resources at the city to either focus on, different particular projects, but I always talk about downtown as what happens. The results of downtown are what happens when we focus on one area or one issue. We use a mechanism like a tax increment development district to actually fund this. So it's possible. It's possible, right? That we could redevelop this entire corridor if we collectively say we're going to put all our eggs in this basket, or at least focus staff time on being able to do this. And so that's something I strongly support. I think the problem with El Paseo, and I'm going to throw South Solano in here during this entire conversation because I've been pushing that since I got elected for this same type of redevelopment, is urban flight, right? Suburbanization has led to a general disinvestment in certain areas in the city. So we've grown east and west, right? We have brand new, really nicely manicured, beautiful neighborhoods with mixed use business and retail and housing, things that we wish we could have in other parts of the city. And so you have this urban flight, right? The more desirable places to live in the city are now on the East Mesa or on the West Mesa. If you're a business owner, right, you could either spend your money rehabbing one of these really old, dilapidated commercial property buildings on El Paseo and probably maybe not be a great investment, or you could go up to a brand new building in Picacho Hills or Sonoma Ranch and have probably a better shot at making it out there with a customer base that potentially has more to offer for your business than a place like El Paseo. And so that's a product, I think, of a changing class system. It's a product of like growing wealth inequality, right, where people with money and don't choose to live in the city. And I think part of that is like the faults of the city. And I think inequity in the way that the city has really spent its resources and development efforts has led to the neglect of certain areas like El Paseo, where just on the corner of White Drive across from Crunch, I think there's 6 empty buildings there now, all across from each other. So blight has led to more blight. These vacant, unmaintained lots, I think they add to this feeling of like disconnection and ambivalence. And so what that means is that the social fabric of that neighborhood deteriorates too. And so I think that's what we really should focus on, is the surrounding residential areas on El Paseo and Solano. These are folks that perhaps are not, the highest income. A lot of families there, this is their first home, or for a lot of people who can rent a place to live that has 3 bedrooms and a backyard, you're going to get your lowest rents in this area potentially, but it's also close enough to services that you can still access, close enough to schools. And so I think this should really be about people, right, about those neighborhoods, about how we actually help those families by redeveloping the built environment. And again, I'm going to pitch for South Solano as well, because that's such a hub also for small businesses right along that corridor. And so creating a plan as part or in addition to the El Paseo or the El Paseo blueprint, for example, identifying vacant developable properties, undevelopable properties, redevelopment hotspots, empty lots that we can turn into pocket parks, playgrounds, things that improve societal bonds in those neighborhoods, landscape design that actually delineates between those public and private spaces, right? Because I know we have a growing problem, a homeless problem, and a lot of it is concentrated on the El Paseo area and on the South Solano area. And I think that's a product of these massive oceans of parking that we've created, and giant back alleys of, with hidden walls everywhere that people can feel like, hey, I don't know what's private, what's public, and so I'm going to hang out here for a while. So I think all those things need to be included in what this corridor redevelopment could look like. So I think to focus on it as a transportation corridor at first, perhaps, at least in my opinion, is not the best way to approach this. I think we need to focus on it as an urban redevelopment project, with transportation being a component of that. But I think if we focus on getting students from the university to downtown, I think we're missing the opportunities to be able to do that. I will say that from looking at the options that Mandy presented, the metropolitan redevelopment area, to me, seems to me like the best tool in terms of actually finding the mechanism through policy, through financing, through access to capital, to be able to rehab and redevelop what I would call blighted areas, right? And so land and building acquisition, demo, zoning regulations, transportation improvements, cultural and community facilities, housing, all those things included under an MRA, I think, are things that I could vision being part of this project. And I'm going to pitch strongly. I know that the El Paseo blueprint only goes up to Espina, but we're just one street away from another major business corridor that's in my district, where tons of really vibrant small businesses abound on South Solano. And so that MRA, I would ask that we push that to South Solano, because I think we need to think big about this entire area, because all that housing on either side of Solano and El Paseo would benefit from this. Otherwise, we'd just be pushing all the activity, we'd be pushing all the blight up to Solano or up to that area. And so I think that's within itself is a really important district to redevelop. And it's a good way also to honor the investments of all those businesses and all those homeowners who throughout the years have invested their time and money into living in this part of the city. So those are my comments for now, but I'm super excited for this. And again, we just ask that we think about South Solano as part of this corridor, because I know a lot of students are going to outdoor adventures to fix their bikes. They're going to Papa John's to order pizza. They're going to get haircuts in Zumba or whatever, at the plaza there, and they're going to get they're going to the Fat Glass too. You guys know that, I hear anyway. So this is if we want to get students involved in all these places, we need to think through South Solano as well. So thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Lynn.
Thank you, Councilor. If you discuss South Solano, I'm going to have to recuse myself from that, because I told you many times, I've never even put you up to this. I don't know why you keep throwing up South Solano, but that's I know. Councilor, yeah, well, I know, but right now we're on El Paseo right now. Councilor Bencomo?
Would you like a microphone to drop?
No.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for that, Councilor Vasquez. I think that you're right on everything you just said. Most of my questions were honestly around getting some of this information in a document, because it was a lot of information from all of you. I would love to see the numbers that you presented, if maybe you could email them to me around total number of riderships in 2019. I'm really interested in looking into that. I'm in having a conversation about what free public transit could look like, and considering everything that you just mentioned, Ms. Gallagher, as well. Honestly, I think as Mandy was presenting all these opportunities, I also felt like the MRA was the thing that I kept coming to. And honestly, I'm glad we're having this conversation about this trolley system, because I feel like it's really cracked open this bigger conversation that we really need to have around El Paseo, which Councilor Vasquez just beautifully said. Because I think that now, as I've been sitting here listening, I feel like investing these kinds of resources to just do one project feels really narrow. And so I would really like to discuss I would really like to encourage this conversation be a lot wider. I'm curious about the task force. I'm curious about how quickly we can get that together, and if they would ultimately be the ones to decide what option would be best for this project. I'm also curious about does the MRA have its own governing body as well, like the TID or the PID?
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, an MRA doesn't have to have its own governing body. In Albuquerque, they have about 20 MRAs, and so they do have an MR agency that is funded through some metropolitan redevelopment bonds, but it doesn't have to have one, depending on how you use it and what tools you're looking at.
Okay, interesting. I would just like, Mandy, will you send me the list of all of those with all the rest of the information, not just the outline that you provided here? I'd like to learn more about those. But anyway, I would like to encourage us, if we are thinking about a task force to really flesh this out, that it be a lot wider than just thinking about a transit line from the convention center to downtown. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor. The reason for the El Paseo corridor blueprint obviously is because it's already done. And along the lines of what Councilor Abeta-Stuvey said, why aren't we doing it? to go into another part of the town. That's possible, but now you're going to see exactly how, if that does, if it's something simple, I don't know. But the task force, the people I just put together real quick was, say, chief of staff to the university, to Chancellor Dan Arvizu is Lenny Martinez, and then the ASNMSU president, representative, or himself or herself. I was thinking maybe each one of you could nominate a business member, and then the council members, maybe 3 of you from, for sure, either District 1 and 2, since you're the bookends, and then either 3 or 4, District 3 or 4, to make 3 council members. So it'd be a total of 11. Come up with some ideas and have another work session and share with us what, in working with staff, what they've come up with, and just see exactly what would it entail to go to a little bit further area, things of this nature. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I would love to see an area redeveloped, but it just makes me uncomfortable because it's right in front of a building that I own in that area, and I know that it happens to be that way. But that's all. I mean, don't get me wrong. Everybody would love to see areas improve, but I just need for Councilor Vasquez to swear on a stack of Bibles that I've never put you up to this. I've never told you to say this. This is strictly your own deal. You've been talking about this since you got elected, and I have no idea where this comes from. But that's all.
Your property is very nice, so I don't think it needs a whole lot of work.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Yes, David.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, David Dahlon, good afternoon. Couple of things. We're close at the next meeting to adopting the remaining policy review committees, and we hope to have them appointed by the March 16th council meeting. That includes the Transportation, Sustainability, and Infrastructure Policy Review Committee. That would be a great starting point to have this discussion to talk about a future task force. I think there's 2 things you need to look at from a task force standpoint. There's the public task force that involves NMSU, the general community, the residents. Then there's a technical component of it that involves staff. When we did the MRA study in 2006, because I've been here a very long time, we did that as part of the consolidated plan update in that year for HUD programs, because CDBG is one of your eligible funding sources if you have a metropolitan redevelopment agency. So we're about to start the process on the consulting for the next consolidated plan. We're at the end of our 5-year plan. So that is something that we could also take to that next level to include in the consolidated plan and MRA study. And when we did the one for downtown, it was a detailed inventory of every building. It also looked at vacancy rates, rental rates, and so forth. So there are a lot of things that we can include within that, but I think we can go to that next level of discussion with the Policy Review Committee, but a task force and a technical committee will need to occur with anything that we go forward. You need the public buy-in, you need the community's buy-in, business owners, property owners, students, the university has avenues. We should be using the students. They are a land-grant university. They have research methods within all of their universities. So we should be using them as a resource so we can make that connection. And we can do this. The last MRA study in 2006, we did it within a relatively short period of time with a hired consultant. And now is the time for us to identify that. And I think, Councilor Vasquez, your expanded area, you can always start big and come down to a smaller area rather than go out, start small and expand out. So we need to look at all of these avenues.
Well, thank you for that, David. I think what really I'd like to do is still have that task force be able to meet so they can at least get some general ideas and then work with your PRC.
Okay.
That way you can have the best of both worlds. You can see what you're talking about, have it run through the PRC, and let the technical side of the city take a look at it. Because I think what I envision is just having free-flowing ideas, and then just then be able to take that to the PRC and see exactly if that's doable or not.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I have one more question.
Yes.
Richard, I'm sorry, I forgot your last name. I'll just call you Mr. Richard. You said that there's a study in the works with NMDOT, right? Did I get that right or no?
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, that is correct. We have partnered with NMDOT. They have 80% funding for our study. I believe might be in legal review right now, but we are moving forward with it this year.
What's the timeline? When do you expect to finish it?
I would not be able to tell you that at this time. I foresee it happening in the next few months. It is an extensive study. I was involved in our current study now that was implemented in 2016. There's public outreach. We have meetings. They do a lot of population density studies. They're going to take into consideration where people live, where people are going, where they're shopping, all the things the different demographics and everything that matter to transit to do this study and give us the best advice going forward on what we should be looking at in the city, based also on the topics that we had chosen to study as well.
Mayor, Councilor Bencomo, Lynn Gallagher again. Regarding that particular short-range planning process, the topics were already selected that have been funded to be looked at. If council's decision is that they would like this particular addition to be added to that, we would have to figure out a funding mechanism and amend the agreement, the contract for that short-range planning process.
I wasn't necessarily thinking that. I was just, you passed by it pretty quickly, and I would really be interested in getting updates from how that study goes. I actually thought the topics that were chosen were topics that I would bring up myself, so thank you.
Well, wait a minute, before you go, I vaguely, I was obviously focused on this. Share with me a little bit about this study. You're talking about who's doing it and how much is it costing?
Currently, we've partnered with NMDOT. They've given us some funding. I believe it's $80,000. The city's committing $20,000 for a total of $100,000 for our short-range transit plan update. We are still going to go out to bid for the consulting firm that will be involved in this. The last consulting firm was actually Nelson Nygaard. I would assume that they would probably bid again on that, but I wouldn't be able to tell you who that consulting firm would be at this time. But it is an extensive study on what we've done, where we're at, where we want to go, how transit is growing in the city, different demographics, things that we're looking at.
Well, I'm not going to propose a policy here, and I'm not going to put David on the spot, but I think what we might want to consider, or what I may bring up to council in another meeting for a work session, is to, when you take a look at transit and how important it is, not only just in our, whether it's the El Paseo corridor, whether it's the city of Las Cruces, or it's the county as a whole, I'm wondering if, because there could be cost savings if we were to partner with your department there, David, so that now we have just one whole network instead of piecemealing it. So I don't know. I can't say too much right now because it hasn't been advertised. So this is what I'm thinking here. So thank you for bringing this up, because you just gave me an idea here that we may just have a whole big network instead of just one here and one here. Now it can be the whole thing. We have to spend more money and put this El Paseo corridor in as part of it. It's fine, but thank you for sharing that.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to add that we are in discussion with Mr. Armijo. He's doing his own plan, but there has been talk about collaboration between the two. Again, we do understand that this is transit as a region. It's not just the city, and we are in contact with Mr. Armijo, and hopefully it is part of our planning study to hopefully get both of the people to talk, whoever's doing his study and ours, to collaborate on that.
Okay, thank you. So let's see here. Was there, after Councilor Bencomo, Mayor Pro Tem, did you have a comment? Thank you on that.
Thank you, everybody, for your presentations. A lot of information. And so I agree with, I think the El Paseo Blueprint is an important plan. And I can't help, and then I know when we asked Mr. Weir about what are the gaps, what were the barriers to getting this up and moving, and I can appreciate the comments there. But I continue to be concerned about, and I appreciate Councilor Vasquez's comments. I'm really concerned about this blight, the vacant properties. I continue to hear, especially I have folks, in fact, a week doesn't go by without having someone come to me and say, I'm interested in a property. I need this amount of square footage. I'm going to the business owners or the people who own the particular office space and not getting much back from them. It continues to be a struggle where they either won't rehab it or they're asking for way too much money. And so I'm thinking that we are needing other ordinance resolutions and policies in place in order to encourage people. I don't know if it's, but again, I'm hearing all these wonderful ideas from folks that want to expand their services to people who are just starting out and continue to hitting a roadblock with real estate, the property owners, those kinds of things. So I'm asking from your perspective as staff, what, if any, of our laws either need to increase, or do we have, what sort of incentives do we need to have in place in order for this to happen? And is some of this, like the MRAs, like the Metropolitan Redevelopment Area plans, are those ways by which to assist people to come to the table with us? Because I know of 2 people right now that have come to me and say, we would like to expand, and we've gone to several business owners, and there's no way that they would even loosen up their requirements to, which at the end of the day hurts us, right, in terms of increased GRT.
Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Gondra, I think there are a few tools that the city could utilize. The MRA would empower the city to enter into those, give them more authority to assist with those type of things. With the Elevate Las Cruces just being adopted, our next step on that, and we already have it programmed, is to update and modernize our building and zoning ordinances to assist with the development. And then, again, just prioritizing our capital improvement projects throughout the city. But as far as those are, other than the MRA and other areas of the city, those other are tools that we can work on with direction from council. Ms. Gus had some other comments about the MRA.
Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem Gonda, the MRA does, as David mentioned, does give us some additional tools to work with property owners. Similar to what we did with Renovate Main Street, it allows us to use some public funding to match private funding, which can help balance some of those issues. It does also give us some abilities with current property owners to ask them or go in and inspect them on a more regular basis instead of just when a use changes. So that may be an opportunity for us.
Yeah, okay, all right. I do agree that this is more narrow in scope, and I'd like for it to increase. I agree with David. We should start larger rather than smaller. It makes it more difficult. I think in terms of, I'm in agreement to establish a task force. I want to ensure that we include the Las Cruces Public Schools. There, we have Las Cruces High and other, especially that I'm aware of. There's many kids that are students that are going because they have dual programming, right, with Arrowhead and different things. We need to I think, ensure that we're including the Las Cruces Public Schools in that. And along that line, is that district, the school board district, the same as our districts? They're different, right? So I think, Mayor, when you spoke of some of the housing that house the elderly and students and those kinds of things, we have some lower income properties over there. I just think that ensuring that we also include folks like the Housing Authority that I think would be really important. They're really struggling, I think, to get their residents and whatnot involved and encouraging them to participate in other avenues. I think having speaking to our Home Builders Association and others around housing is going to be extremely important. And the other thing is one of the questions, Mandy, that I had in terms of the public improvement district is, can you explain a little more about what that would look like in terms of kind of the steps that we would take to do that? And the reason I'm asking is the infrastructure up to date there on the El Paseo corridor? Or would we need to update it as we did the downtown?
I would not like to speak to the infrastructure. I'll probably let somebody else answer that part of the question. But the public improvement district, just you asked for a little bit more clarification on that. There would be an application from 25% of the property owners that want a public improvement district, and it could be used to pay for public infrastructure improvements or enhanced services. So just as an example, if there was certain type of maintenance that was being requested or landscaping, that money could be used for that. And it would have to be, but it would be taken as a public hearing and an election, and at least 75% of the qualified property owner and voters would have to want this to come into place because it does establish additional levies on the property tax. Did that answer?
It does.
Okay.
It does. I guess when I see something like this, I'm thinking that you all have done some more research in terms of what the infrastructure needs are there, right? And if this would be the best avenue to take in terms of updating, because it certainly needs landscaping update, right? I envision that El Paseo corridor looking very similarly in terms of landscaping, like it looks on the Tal Shore area, you know how that just beautiful trees and just landscaping. That's what I'm envisioning there. But I don't know about their water and sewer and sort of what that looks like.
And Mayor Pro Tem, the blueprint talks about different types of trees and that type of infrastructure, which would be something this could fund. I'm going to let David answer.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Gandra, David Maestas with the Public Works Department. With respect to the type of infrastructure that is in place for water, wastewater, the utilities, great question, because anytime we do any construction on roadways that have been in place for several years, we are going to have some difficulties. Through that corridor, we have run into some areas that have already been maintained. You might recall an emergency wastewater installation that was completed on El Paseo and Farney. So some of that area has been upgraded. I would anticipate, to answer your question specifically with comparison to our downtown project, it wouldn't be as significant for the utilities that we run into there. The other thing that we do have is we do have additional right-of-way and corridor through there. So as we do improvements, some of the trees that you're talking about that you're hitting on, we have room if we build within the corridor to help with those type of installations.
So would it be completely unheard of to start maybe like, how long would this public improvement district be? Did you say 5 years? Is that what or is there a time frame?
Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, the Public Improvement District does not have a time frame. It was the Business Improvement District is reevaluated every 5 years. The Public Improvement one does not have an end date unless the committee or governing body chooses to end it once the projects are completed and paid for.
And the election would be a ballot, a mail-in ballot probably?
That is correct.
Okay. So for me, if we're going to do this, we have to look at this first, especially laying conduit and just the things that are needed because of the trolley system and the kind of transportation that we think it'll require. I'm not suggesting the public improvement district. What I'm thinking is infrastructure first, right? Building that up, or maybe simultaneously. Is it completely unheard of having a public improvement district and a Metropolitan, can you do both? You can, oh, you did say that, the church and water, or, I don't know. I'm confusing them, it's a lot of information, but I'm wondering if we can do one first, and then, once we update I mean, I guess it's hard for me to say what to start with when I don't really know, other than David, you saying, Mr. Maestas, that this is going to be as significant as the...
Mayor Pro Tem Gandra, David Maestas again. One of the things that we do differently on our projects now is we incorporate subsurface exploration in advance of the projects. And that might be something that we could consider before we get to the next phases of moving forward with reconstruction projects or designs for reconstruction projects. And that way you have a better idea of what the utility system looks like underneath and how much we will have to put forward to upgrades for those type of infrastructure systems.
Yeah, I would really like that information as we're moving. It would be really important to me. And I would agree that the metropolitan the redevelopment area looks like the better of the ideas as we move forward in terms of tools in our toolbox. Let's see.
And Mayor Pro Tem, the question of what should go first, it's open to City Council's direction. A metropolitan redevelopment plan could help us establish some of the goals, which maybe would help us determine if one of the financing options, the TID, the PID, or the BID is most appropriate.
Try to say that fast, right? Yeah. I appreciate that. I think, again, I want us to be really cognizant of the fact that that infrastructure there is really old and is going to need to be updated. But I think this will definitely give the kind of facelift in terms of ensuring that we have that. I mean, Councilor Vasquez and I earlier were in a meeting along with the mayor and our public safety, but law enforcement. And, you know, I think this would be a way to encourage folks that we haven't left them behind, that we really do care about them and care about what's happening in their area. And this is certainly, I mean, I came to school here in the 80s. That was a very vibrant place. That's where, I mean, kids were the hangout. They did that evening, that nighttime ritual, driving, you know, cruising around down El Paseo. It was like a big deal. It doesn't look that way. And I think that we need to be able to improve in there, and I think this is a great idea. So thanks.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
can I ask Mandy a question? On your slide, is that a typo? Does it say at least 25%? And you said verbally 75%.
25% has to make the application. 75% has to approve it in the election.
It's a lot.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. You know, you have this is a good idea about including the schools, and let me tell you why. And this, I think, Councilor Flores would like this. It just dawned on me. I think the students at the high school students that live at, let's say their parents are attending the university and live in student housing. I think a lot of them go to Las Cruces High School. So if they have access, we'll include the superintendent's office and transit department, because they may want to just use that to go, instead of a school bus, they can make it there to school pretty quick. So I think those are some pretty good ideas as well. So, okay, so anyone else? Councilor Vasquez?
Thank you, Mayor. Mandy, some follow-up questions on the MRA is, so I'm thinking about, in particular, rehabbing or redeveloping existing private property, right, and incentivizing people to do that on their own so that they become more desirable, but also evaluating what's up to code, what's not, you know, where there's opportunities for acquisition on the part of the city, you know, not to keep, but obviously to put it into good productive use. So with the MRA, can you just talk a little bit about, you mentioned land and building acquisition, demolition, and zoning regulations. Through this establishment of an MRA, which you said a planner has to designate, some professional planner essentially determines if the MRA is eligible to be an MRA or the certain area, And then how does that process then float down to the policy spectrum of like, okay, what kind of policy decisions can we make with the MRA that we couldn't without it?
Mayor and Councilor Vasquez, so it has to be designated with a professional planner or professional architect.
Okay.
And that is, that they would come in, they would do an evaluation of the designated area to talk about, is it an area of slum and blight? What is the inventory? What is the vacancy rate? I think all of those have been stated. So that's how we would start to see what is the current state of the area, and that is why it would be appropriate to be a designated MRA. The MRA plan then would be something that would identify all of those things that you just mentioned. What are some of the goals? Are there land and building acquisition and redevelopment and sale opportunities? Are the zoning regulations out of date? Do they need to be updated? For example, in downtown, they adopted a downtown development code to make it easier to develop those areas. So that plan would kind of outline those goals, and then it would be adopted by council at the policy level. And there would be items that could be decided by council, such as how do we bring them into conformance for zones? How do we, or what items would we be interested in purchasing or redeveloping, or what that may look like?
So theoretically, the MRA could use the recommendations from like the El Paseo blueprint to establish the plan. So like the corridor could be used as the guiding document that would just, okay.
Mayor and Councilor Vasquez, if we were to bring somebody to designate the area and also the MRA plan, we would provide all those documents to them so they have the same history to move forward.
I really like that. I mean, that gives us a tool that's both a plan and a tool to implement the plan, right, through these different policy decisions that we can make that would be guided through the plan, and then determine if there's some additional TIDs or PIDs that might be appropriate, right, for additional funding. When it comes to, I guess I'm thinking about El Paseo and how massive some of these parking lots are in the big box and kind of old retail areas. That to me is just a huge barrier in terms of what can you do with a space that's not yours, that's huge, and there's no way there's going to be 500 cars, parked at any given time, or however many spots they have there. So through the MRA, potentially, the city could acquire pieces of parking lot and put those into better productive use, right, through a public-private partnership, perhaps, kind of like what we did with the Amador.
Councilor Vasquez, that's correct.
Okay. And I think that's really important because I think we could landscape the street beautifully. We could have corridor signs. We could have lots of leafy trees. But ultimately, if we can't get the private sector to cooperate or to incentivize them to do the right thing in terms of redeveloping this area with the resources that they have in the city, with the resources we have, it's not going to work. So I'm glad that tool is available to our disposal for us to use it. The zoning regulation piece, does that also allow you to enact certain regulations, like let's say like on signage within that MRA? So if we were to say, okay, you have to have certain type of signage, or you have to retrofit your signage to a certain style, is that something that also available as a tool?
Mayor and Councilor Vasquez, I'm not sure. I'd have to look at it specifically.
Okay.
Or David can answer.
Mayor and Councilor Vasquez, that's a tool that you have available to you today, but it would just be provided additional justification if you included it in the MRA.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
The downtown and the university have different sign standards and some different development standards than the rest of the city. So
Okay.
it's a tool the city's familiar with.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Weir. Thank you, Manny. Thank you, Mayor.
So just to clarify the leafy tree comment on my state of the city. So years ago when we were planning the plaza, I thought the pictures we were showed were leafy trees instead of little twigs that will eventually grow up into a leafy tree. So that's why we're going to do leafy trees. Okay. All right. Okay. Anyone else before we go back to some public comment? Anyone wish to speak? 2 minutes on, yes, Don, just come forward on what you've heard so far. And
Don Kurtz, and thank you, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to mention on the leafy tree concept. I was part of I participated in the El Paseo Corridor Project 10 years ago and went to the groups, and there was a woman there that told me that after movies downtown about 45 years ago, they would walk down El Paseo together under cottonwood trees that went along that whole area there, that a lot of it's now parking lots. I personally remember the drive-in theater that was on El Paseo with many big leafy trees. At any rate, I think the threat, as the mayor pointed out in his State of the City, of climate change, one of the threats for New Mexico, Las Cruces particularly, is extreme heat. And getting shade in place will have a huge impact on people's quality of life. But anyway, I just want to say it was there once and it can happen again, I think. So just wanted to put that in.
Thank you for that. That must have been a really long time ago because I don't remember those leafy trees. Okay, so this is what I envision, and this is just a start, and we don't have to just, but what I was thinking is this task force, if you all concur, a couple members from the university, like from the chancellor's office or his chief of staff, and then the AS and MSU president. Las Cruces Public Schools, from the superintendent's office and transit department, because it'd be nice to have the the school board, and they can come as an ex officio, but these are the ones who are going to tell us this is how many we need, so many kids drive the bus, someone with more technical, from the business community, each one of you, and that doesn't mean you can't put someone from the home builders or from the housing authority. I mean, those are all business, whether they're for-profit or non-profit, there's no real hard and fast rule on that. And then the 3 council members, I think District 1 and 2, since you all bookend, and then either 3 or 4 will have to flip a coin or draw straws or something like that. You can have, okay, there you go. And then this is, of course, excluding, we need to obviously include David and city transit staff. And then after they meet at least one time, then come back and have that PRC, the transportation PRC, and that task force. And I would prefer that it be more of a public meeting so that members of the public can chime in and hear it, and then decide from there and listen to what they've been able to come up with. Is that something you guys would support?
Mayor,
yes, Councilor.
A clarifying question. Is this task force just to study the bus, or is it the entire
corridor? The whole thing, everything.
The whole thing?
Yeah.
Do you think that seems to me, it's pretty wide-ranging, right, what we're talking about with the MRA and the TID and the PID, and so in terms of the membership of that group, would the school district be just as invested into talking about those things than they would just about the transportation, just about the bus, if that makes sense?
Well, if let's see here, I made it a point when I was 15 and a half, because back then I could get a driver's license, so I wouldn't have to walk to Cruces High. You never know. If you extend it to where you're wanting to do it, they still want to, they'll be able to take that. Well, no, I take that back. But even in near the college area, they're going to be able to jump on that bus, hopefully, or the trolley, sure, and make it to class instead of, those rare times where your parents would drop you off and you tell them, hey, drop me off about a block away and then I'll walk so that no one sees you dropping me off to school.
No, I mean, I agree. I think it's a good group of folks to be involved. I'm just wondering if they'll be just as invested into looking at the city policy mechanisms or making recommendations on things that we just discussed today about MRAs and PIDs. Like, is that the right group to bring a recommendation to?
Well, I guess they could leave. I mean, if they got tired of listening to that part, but we needed them. I think it's important and to include them because of when I think about it, that could be an additional means of getting the kids to school as opposed to just waiting, for the school bus and having to go to all those different bus stops. And that'd be kind of neat to just see them driving on the.
I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be wise to separate those two issues because they seem, one potentially is a $54 million project or something crazy, and the other one is a $200,000 bus line in terms of the transportation. The actual bus going from campus to downtown, and what that needs to me is a much smaller budget item than redevelopment of 2 entire districts of the city. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, sure.
I just want to make sure that it's.
So how would you envision the task force then?
I would say if it's just the transportation piece that you would like folks to focus on in terms of that trolley, right, and the most effective use, I think that's one conversation. And the other conversation is like, okay, let's redevelop El Paseo and let's use the blueprint and let's use the knowledge of staff. Let's have discussions about the proper mechanisms. That seems more like a higher dialogue kind of.
Okay. So have one with the one that I just mentioned, and then have yet another one without them?
Yes, and I think maybe the larger discussion, that could be something that could go straight to the PRC or on infrastructure and public transportation for that discussion to start there in terms of the redevelopment of El Paseo and Solano.
Okay. Okay. So, well, let's do this, if you don't mind. Let's just get the task force started.
Yep.
And then let them meet once before we go to another schedule, and then we'll figure, would that be okay?
Yes.
May I propose something, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
How about we ask someone at the public schools if they'd want to be interested in participating in a project like this, and then they could decide if.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, we'll make them an offer they can't refuse.
Right. I mean, I think we're just making an assumption.
No,
Correct.
I would think that they would. I'm just presuming that they would because, I envision high school kids jumping on the trolley just to get to class instead of having to walk, and less traffic for them. And again, yes, Councilor Beta Stuvey.
I was going to say, I do think that the public schools might have a vested interest, considering that Las Cruces High School is right on El Paseo, and if we do start doing projects around there, their input would be necessary for the redevelopment, not just transit.
So
I agree. I just want to make sure we're not overcommitting some. It seems like a super big discussion to have, and that would folks both have the time and expertise. Like I can't imagine the chief of staff or the president actively participating in a policy discussion about redeveloping like El Paseo for the longer term. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the reason why I was going to bring Lenny along is to be able to, when the new NMSU students come to the campus, this could be included in their student card, ID card, whatever it may be, and those fees or whatever that they encompass, so that they now know that they have access to a free ride back and forth. Sure. Because only they, only they can do that. And then, of course, the NMSU president, so that they can filter it through their legislative body to let them know that, hey, is this something there that, perhaps they may want to change the boundaries a little bit. I don't know. I just thought about including them.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. I think former Mayor Pro Tem Thomas also.
Yes.
Could I add something, Mr. Mayor?
You can take as long as you want.
Thank you. Sharon Thomas again. I don't see Councilor Vasquez, the university and those people talking about MRAs and all that sort of stuff. I think that the corridor plan, the blueprint, corridor neighborhood blueprint includes much more than the transit. So it seems to me like the conversation would be mostly about that document, but not onto some of the things that you've been discussing here that are pertinent to the city, but more than just the transit. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem Emeritus. What is your suggestion again?
My suggestion is that the discussion is primarily around the corridor blueprint, neighborhood blueprint. Is that what it's called? Corridor neighborhood blueprint. Is that the correct term? So it's more than the document is more than just about the transit. It's about that whole area and how you would redevelop and rehabilitate that whole area. And so it seems like that would be the starting point for the discussion with some of these other entities, but not stuff like you've been talking about, like MRAs and where all that goes. I don't think that would interest the schools or the university. Or
so do you think we should include the university and the Las Cruces Public Schools?
Oh, yeah, I think they should be included, talking about the corridor, sure.
It could almost be like two parts. The first part is just this, the transit area part of it, and then part two would be now how we get more of the infrastructure if we need to, the MRA or the TID, and then from that point, they just fall off if they want to. They don't have to come to the meeting. Is that what you're getting at?
I think I was more saying that the transit is not a separate entity. The transit is part of the corridor neighborhood blueprint. And so I think that those other entities would be interested in that part and, you know, developing the whole corridor, including the transit, but not into the details of how we're going to go about doing it, the MRAs and those things, because that's really more a city consideration.
Okay, so I think if we get them all first together, I think it would be the first part, and then they can kind of figure, like Councilor Vasquez was thinking, you know, maybe they just think, well, we've done our part and we're good. You guys carry on.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comment? So is that something we're moving forward with? Understandable, just to reiterate, so have about 13 members, in MSU, Las Cruces Public Schools. That's assuming if they want to join, which I would think, I'll personally invite them. And then you all, if you start thinking of your business members, either for-profit or nonprofit, can be the housing authority or the home builders. And then the three counselors, 1, 2, and 3, District 1's 2 and 3. And then, of course, David Armijo and City Transit staff. Councilor Sorg, you have any comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate that. Yes, as you all been discussing this, I've been going over the El Paseo Corridor Community Blueprint, and I can't help but notice that as we go through the goals that are on that blueprint, they're matching what you've been discussing today, and all 10 actions are dealing with all of the ideas that have been shared here on the council. Again, I'll say it one more time. That's where we start, and we go from there.
All right,
Thank
great.
you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. So does that include city presentations? Yeah. Okay, I guess if there's nothing further, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Councilor Flores, second by Councilor Vasquez, that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're adjourned. It's 3:43 p.m. Thanks. Okay, so